You're listening to the Back Home Network, presented by Homefield Apparel.
And welcome, Hoosier fans, to another edition of Assembly Call Radio, where we discuss the most important topics in the world of Indiana basketball. This is our 337th edition of Assembly Call Radio, and it is our 1,039th episode overall of the Assembly Call, recorded on the evening of August 22nd, 2024. I'm your host, Coach Brian Tonsoni. And let's begin this edition of the Assembly Call, how we begin every edition of the Assembly Call, and that is with our Hoosier Proud banner moment.
And Indiana is the national champion.
When it comes down, Indiana will be champion.
Martin takes the shot.
The Hoosiers have won the national championship.
This month's banner moment is simply the fact that Bloomington and Indiana University, they're moving students back onto campus. They're arriving at dorms, apartments, Greek houses, rental houses, you name it. Bloomington is a special place throughout the entire year, but there is something special about the return of students and the life that comes back to campus. Now, the congestion and all the wrong way drivers may cause a little stress in town. However, it's the students that make the atmosphere at the Rock and Assembly Hall come alive. We sports fans, we add to it, but we recognize the need for a wild, crazy, engaged student section. The football program, the basketball program, along with sports like soccer, volleyball, women's basketball, baseball, and others, forgive me for not mentioning all of the sports, they need the support of students. So, hey, students, get moved in and start partying. That's what you're there for. Maybe buy a few textbooks, but don't be in a hurry. You have a huge role in the success of this year's athletic program, so get fired up. Make sure those coolers have lots of ice, and get ready to be loud and proud at all the athletic events. Let's go, Hoosiers. Okay, let me introduce a co-host this week. We have one here. We have a couple on the way who are doing fatherly duties, and they will be joining us along the way. You might also get a little bit of just Coach Tonsoni, unplugged, uncensored, in transition. But to kick us off, he is a senior writer at Sports Illustrated, a self-renowned shot doctor, still looking for patience in his office, and a man who is celebrating another trip around the sun. Happy birthday, Ryan Phillips.
Analyzing players, finding every wrinkle. He hasn't ever hosted, never lifted a finger. He's got all the
Well, let me
answers.
quickly add just one thing about this.
Dude just interrupted his own jingle.
Ryan, it's been a while. Happy birthday, dude. What do you want to talk about today?
Thanks, buddy. I appreciate it. I apologize to Liz. I will be jumping off after about 25 minutes because of birthday-related plans, but I wanted to come say hi. Thank you to everybody who reached out and wished me a happy birthday today. There have been listeners and friends of the show and everything, so thank you guys. Means a lot. Makes me feel good at this ripe old age of 40-ish. But no, I think the thing we're going to talk about, especially in this opening segment, is Battle for Atlantis. We got the bracket. Interesting draw for Indiana getting Louisville in the first game, and I know we'll jump into this, Coach. And just I think that's something that a lot of people are interested in and kind of were maybe a little concerned about when the non-conference schedule came out. Was okay, well, it's kind of a soft schedule, lower ranked teams they're going to be playing, lower rated, I would say. And again, this is all projection, preseason projection. You don't know how it's going to turn out. But a lot of people are saying, well, look, they'll get their good games in the Big Ten and the Battle for Atlantis. Now we see how that could potentially play out or not play out as far as getting those tier one, those quad one wins or matchups, really. So I want to talk about that with you, Coach, when we get into it. But I think the other thing on what you said is the students coming into campus. We have a lot of new Hoosiers over the last week and a half. Really excited for everybody to get moved in and experience college the way we did, hopefully, and in a very positive, safe way, please. But also to get involved and like you said, show up, go to these games. I mean, you're only in college once. You only have a chance to go do these things and experience all of these things once. Well, hopefully. But go to football games, go tailgate. The man sitting across from me is the master tailgater. He made the most of it for years, but go do that. Go to basketball games, support the volleyball team. It doesn't just have to be football and basketball. Go support all these athletic teams, these people who train so hard and work so hard to represent your university. Go get involved, go follow them. It's really fun too, going to some of those other sports, soccer, volleyball, things that people don't normally think of. They're really fun. It can be a great time, and it's a great way to connect with other students. So I hope that everybody who's on campus really gets involved and supports these great athletes that we have at Indiana.
Absolutely. Ryan, again, happy birthday. I know you got a nice dinner to head to here in a little bit. We're glad you took a little bit of your special day to spend with us. In segment one, Ryan and I are going to talk about the importance of the Battle Atlantis and the bracket and some things that Indiana really needs to accomplish while in the Bahamas. Segment two, I was on a podcast called Feed the Post. It's one of those guys from that other school, the post-game show Boilers in the Stands, but he breaks out and does some independent stuff on Big Ten basketball, and he has a lot of videos about every team in the Big Ten. He asked me to be on to talk about Indiana, and he asked some great questions. But we'll ask whoever's here as our host, we'll ask them the same questions that I was asked on Feed the Post. But go check that out on YouTube if you really want to know who Indiana's playing in the Big Ten. Joe does a really good job. And in segment three, again, we have some really great questions from you, our supporters. We're going to try to answer those in segment three. All of that is coming up this week on Assembly Call Radio. But we got to talk about our sponsor.
Homefield Apparel, wear one for the team.
This edition of Assembly Call Radio, just like all the shows on the Back Home Network, is presented by our friends at Homefield Apparel, where they have the largest collection of vintage IU apparel that you'll find anywhere. And it's not just IU. Homefield has unique, interesting designs printed on the softest, most comfortable fabrics for over 150 colleges and universities, plus plenty of other brands like Little Five, IndyCar, The Fever, and more. And they're always expanding and trying something new, including launching new schools, as well as the unique bundle ideas like the recently released Platinum football boxes. The only downside is that with Homefield's ever-expanding popularity, sometimes the best stuff sells out quickly. So if you want to have a shot at getting stuff when it's released, you really need to follow them on social media, subscribe to their texts and emails, and make sure you're staying up to date so you don't miss anything. I've taken a little bit of break to kind of boost the savings. I had a bathroom remodel here at the house, so I had to go on a home field break. But I'm wearing
it wasn't imposed by Amy? It was.
No,
it was
well, yeah, it was.
All right.
But the Indiana here Hyper sweatshirt, good stuff at Homefield. And we'll talk about Indiana branding as well. They're opening up the branding of the courts. Maybe it's Homefield gets marked on an Assembly Hall or Memorial Stadium. We'll see.
Get on
Go
it,
to
Connor.
Homefield.
Get on it, Connor.
Go to homefieldapparel.com and use our promo code HOME23 to get 15% off your entire first order. That's promo code HOME23 for 15% off. Once again, the website is homefieldapparel.com. Wear one for the team. Okay, so the hot topic here for us, Ryan, is the Battle for Atlantis bracket. IU has the opening game at 12 o'clock Eastern. I think that is the day before Thanksgiving. Round two is on Thanksgiving, and the third round is the day after Thanksgiving.
You know me in a noon
tip.
You know me in a noon tip, Coach.
Yeah, let's
not
go.
A big fan.
Let's go. But Indiana plays Louisville. They will play the winner of West Virginia and Gonzaga in the top bracket. The bottom bracket will see Oklahoma and Providence, and then they will see Davidson versus Arizona, and the winners advance to the winner bracket, and then the 7th and 9th place game or 8th place games, all 7th, those things are played out on Friday. So, Ryan, your initial thoughts when you saw this release come out that Louisville was the opening opponent for the Indiana Hoosiers?
It's two complete unknowns. You don't know what you're going to get from Indiana. You don't know what you're going to get from Louisville. Louisville with Pat Kelsey in there, it's completely changed everything. Indiana, I mean, there are returning players and there are guys you can rely on, but it's pretty much a roster reset, new guards, new bench. I mean, it's a huge change. And so it's so fine. And honestly, this game is like the perfect microcosm of modern college basketball. You have a new coach with a completely new roster, and you have an old coach with a mostly new roster. And that's college basketball now. It's college football as well. So it is kind of the transfer portal game or just the NIL game or whatever we want to call it. This is exactly what happens in college basketball. And so when you look at it, you're kind of like, oh, Louisville, Indiana, two huge brands in college basketball. And you're like, that should be a great game. Well, we don't know if it's going to be a great game or not. I mean, you really don't. And I feel like we could say that a lot this year about certain matchups and all of that stuff, but it is really an unknown. And I think that the draw is interesting because they have the chance, if you win, to hit all of the teams in there. You beat Louisville. Hopefully Louisville goes on to be good. You play Gonzaga, who's one of the two top teams in this, and then you would play Arizona, who's one of the top. So you have a chance to hit 3 games and really, get that inside straight and really, get what you need to get out of this tournament. There's also the possibility if you happen to falter in the opening game, you're going to be playing in a strange place at an early tip, all of those things that happens. You might not get any great games out of this tournament because you could wind up playing, and certainly major conference teams, but not the elite teams you were hoping, where you might wind up playing, West Virginia and Davidson if it falls wrong for you. So it's an interesting draw. And I think that Indiana has an opportunity because they don't have to face Arizona or Gonzaga in the opening game. You have an opportunity to advance and then sort of play out your own destiny and control it. And it just depends on what you can do. Again, these are also early in the season, so this might be the time to catch the good teams before they can really round into form. So if you do catch a Gonzaga or an Arizona early, this might be the time to get them, not March when they're playing really well and built towards a long run of the tournament. What are your thoughts on it? I mean, when you look at this and how it's playing out, how do you feel?
Well, it kind of makes sense if you go to Bart Torvik. It just falls top team in Bart Torvik's rankings all the way down to 8. 1 plays 8, 2 plays 7, and Indiana is the 3rd best team in the battle for Atlantis, according to Bart Torvik. And where you're right is there's such a range of outcomes, and really,
that's what these tournaments are. But at the same time, this feels like even more than usual.
Winning helps. Losing doesn't hurt, except for the fact that Indiana doesn't have any marquee other games in the non-conference schedule. So if you're not successful, you lose to Louisville, you go 1-2 in the losers bracket or whatever, you only get one kind of nice win out of it. The problem is then you have to do all your work in the Big Ten, and winning on the Big Ten in the road is where you got to get some work done. And so it's not must win necessarily, but it is darn close, Ryan, in my opinion, to a must win, because getting in that going 1-2, if you beat Louisville and then lose to Gonzaga and then lose in the 3rd game is not horrible, because your strength of schedule. Win that first one. But you got to win that first one to get in that winner's bracket, because, like you said, if you lose to Louisville, and Louisville, I think, is a borderline tournament team possibly, so that could become a quad 1. Yes, a quad 1 win or a quad 1 loss. But then you got West Virginia. And if you lose to West, now that's a must-win game, So, and even if you win that game, that's not going to do much for your seeding purposes. And we'll talk floor and ceiling throughout the preseason here, but I think Indiana is definitely a tournament team. The question is, do you accumulate enough good wins to get into a 3, 4, 5 seed where you can maybe make a deep run playing favorable matchups?
Yeah, and I think
they're going to have to win in the Battle of Atlantis, and they don't have to win at all, but get that first one is just really vital.
Well, once you get the first one, I think you can relax a little bit and just play free against the good teams. Yeah. And if you don't win, keep it close, play a good game. It's that you can then have that mentality of course you go out trying to win every game, but you also have that mentality where you're playing a higher seeded team, a better team. You're not expected to win, but you have the chance to make some noise. And so you can play kind of, like I said, play freer and play knowing that if you lose in a good game, it's not the worst thing in the world. I think that the other thing is, and a lot of people I've kind of had this battle with people about the non-conference schedule a little bit, and you will pick up a lot of good games in the Big Ten, you would assume. And so that will certainly help. But I've had this battle with people about, it's just get into the tournament. And it's like, well, if you look historically, especially over the last decade, the higher seeded teams are, once the field clears of the upsets, it's pretty chalky all the way to the finish now over the last 10 years. I think 2 5 seeds have won the NCAA tournament in the last, I think, 12 years, and they're both UConn. I mean, they're both two different UConn teams. It was Kemba Walker's team and Shabazz Napier's team, I think, if I'm correct. So it's for over the long stretch. If you really want to make noise in the tournament, you do have to be a higher seed, and so seeding does matter, and your positioning in that tournament does matter. The first weekend, anything can happen. Anyone can win. Anybody can lose. But once you're past that, the higher seeded teams typically win. And so, again, you have to put yourself in position to succeed on top of just winning games. You have to win the right games. And when you lose, you cannot lose by too much, because that can hurt you and get you out of that mix to actually make a deep run.
When Indiana got a 4 seed in 2023, they won on the road at Xavier. Xavier ended up being a 3 seed. They beat Purdue twice. Those are the types of wins you need to accumulate. They beat a North Carolina team at home that just barely missed the tournament, but that was a good win nonetheless over a name brand. So you have to accumulate those things, and I think this team's going to get to the tournament. I really would be shocked if it didn't.
There's too much talent for that.
We have waited way too long to just get to the tournament. We want to get to the tournament and then have a chance by getting to the Sweet 16, and then the matchups really play a huge part of that. But we have really Indiana has really put all of their eggs in this basket of playing. And if you win that first game, and Gonzaga also has to win, I mean, they could get upset by West Virginia, but if it's Indiana-Gonzaga, a loss there, it doesn't really hurt, because your strength of schedule goes up. And then you at worst you have the Oklahoma Providence team in the what is that to be the third place game. Those teams are sitting at 56 and 60 in Bart Torvik. They're likely to be inside the top 50 of net. So now you're going to end up playing, and Louisville gets good. You could play 3 quad 1 games. Even if you lose 2, you play 3, and it helps your strength of schedule. That first game is so important.
Yeah, that's the turn. And honestly, it could be the turn of the non-conference schedule. Assuming they take care of business where they're supposed to, that's the hinge of the non-conference schedule, because they kind of put all their eggs in the Atlantis basket for a tough game. And there's some okay games in there, but in general, they're playing lower tier teams. And maybe that's smart given all of the roster turnover. And as you said, teams taking a while to gel and all of that stuff. Maybe having a weak non-conference is a good thing if it leads to you taking care of business at Atlantis. So I think
your margin of error is small with the schedule as they have designed it. You have to be successful. And you know what? Let's be positive. You win the darn thing, and you're really looking good.
You're set.
You're set up.
Probably in the top 10.
And you're really set. So it's one of those risk-reward situations. It's a risky situation. I would have liked to have seen 1 or 2 more chances. But if you go and win it, and then here's the question I have for you. Indiana's best back-to-back-to-back series was in Woodson's first year at the Big Ten tournament, where they won. The game against Michigan, came from behind. Then they upset the number 1 seed the next morning. And then they played a heck of a game against Iowa, and it took a crazy shot to beat them. But since then, they have not played well in repeat games that are after each other. They've lost the second game of the Big Ten tournament the last 2 years. They had a really disappointing outing against Louisville last year in New York City, and really were down, 7-8 points with 3.5 minutes to go before they tricked the coach by playing zone. And were able to come back. So they need to find that magic of that first year of playing. It's a tough turnaround when you play at noon, and then you're going to play at noon or 2:30 the next day. You already have prepared scouting reports, but it's only 2 weeks of basketball. Yeah. With all the roster chance, you only had 2 or 3 games of film to watch, and you don't have a lot of time you just have a walkthrough in a ballroom. And Indiana has not done well. That's a concern of mine. Do you agree or disagree with that?
I completely agree, and I think that some programs handle that well, and some programs do not. And it's like Duke always handles whether it's their scheduling or what. When they go to Maui or Atlanta, I don't know. I'm throwing Atlantis out there. I don't know if they've been there, but or the ACC tournament, some of those bigger schools are great at that short turnaround. Some of them are really bad at it. And you see like Calipari in Kentucky struggled in the SEC tournament for years. And it's a unique skill as a program to have because you're never going to need it any other time. You need it during your conference tournament and the preseason terms. The only time you need it. You don't need it during the NCAAs. You get a day off minimum, and then you get a week off, or basically a week off. So it is a unique skill, and you have to program things correctly, whether it's meals and walkthroughs and how do you schedule that, bedtimes, like all of that has to be in sync to get you to playing at a peak ability at the right time. And again, some programs are really good at that and some aren't. Indiana hasn't really been great at it in my time as a fan.
Right.
I mean, and so it's not just Mike
regardless
Woodson.
of who is coaching.
Yeah. It's just, it's never been something they've done well. So it is interesting to see. It's going to be interesting to see how they handle it now with a different roster, with some veteran pieces, with some younger pieces, completely kind of new outlook, and also honestly a sense of urgency from the program this season to make, hey, they have to do well this season or there's going to be a lot of questions asked. And so this is their big showcase early. How do they handle it? Do they program it differently? What do they do? And so, yeah, it is a unique skill as a program. And Indiana hasn't really gotten that dialed in for, I don't know, 2 decades. So let's see what happens.
One more question. I know we got to get you out of here in about the next 2 or 3 minutes because it is your birthday. The early start in these things, it's a ballroom. What's the effect of the ballroom atmosphere instead of a big environment? Does that play a role in anything? We know Louisville, and I'll talk about this after you leave. They like.
Are they playing it in the ballroom?
Yeah, it's that Bahamas where it's the blue, whatever, where they played their summer ball. They're playing in the ballroom, and combine that with your early start. Would it be better to play in the Battle for Atlantis in game 3 or 4 in the bottom bracket, or get out early and play in the afternoon? Your quick thoughts on that, and then we'll send you to your birthday celebration.
I don't mind. By the way, I don't like an early start. I don't, but they're going to be there for a bit. It's not going to be like, they have a normal weeknight game and then have to recover quickly and play early. So they're going to be building up to that. And so I don't think that's going to be as big a deal. The one issue I have with the early is there's going to be a lot of distractions because you're at Atlantis and all of that. So I don't know. I do think that it's going to affect both teams equally though. So I think that levels the playing field as far as that goes. There isn't going to be a home team that's playing early versus a road team that's playing, so I think that kind of levels the playing. I do expect some ugly basketball. I'm sure the atmosphere will not be electric. And also it's, again, early. So I do think it'll be ugly, and it's going to be about weathering storms and limiting turnovers is probably the big thing there. I think that is really going to be negated by the fact that both teams have to deal with it. But at the same time, and it's going to be early in the season too. But at the same time, that's the, I don't know. I guess that just throws more into the mystery of how it's going to be and how it's going to be handled and all of that. So we'll see. Not a fan of an early start usually, but again, I'm sure other teams aren't as well. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out.
And another question going in for both of these programs, it's early in the season.
Yeah.
And Indiana under Mike Woodson has gelled after January 1st for the most part. 2023, they had a couple nice wins early, but they got, their rhythm going in late January, February, or last year it was at the very end of February. So the emphasis, you got to be ready to play high-level games back to back to back early. Louisville, they're all in the same boat, but the team that can master that the best wins these Maui games, wins these special exempt tournaments, and that's something that Indiana has to be ready for that they haven't done in the past is play really consistent basketball early. And with newcomers on both sides, did you get your work done in the summer? Did you get ready? Those teams are going to have a better chance to win in environments like this.
And I think one last thing is on that non-conference schedule being weak, Indiana has to take care of business.
Yes.
In a big way, which means blow out the bad teams. Do not play close with them. I think they probably have to win all their non-conference games other than the Atlantis games and win them convincingly. And so they have to have a jump start on the season as quick as it gets. And you can't see them finding their way through games, for the first month, just because that's how you end up out of the tournament like last year.
Absolutely. Well, hey, happy birthday again. We'll
Thank
send
you,
on your
everybody.
way. I have some things on Louisville that I will share, and then when we're done, we'll go to break, and hopefully we'll have Jerod back with us, and then Andy's on his way home from a soccer game, and will be joining us as well. So happy birthday, Ryan. Take care, my friend. All right, so in getting ready for tonight, just looking up some information on Louisville, there is a really good podcast on The Brink. I haven't had a chance to listen to it yet, but they really break down that opening game against Louisville for a lot more details. I'm going to send you that direction. Alex does a great job over there at Inside the Hall. But Pat Kelsey comes from College of Charleston, had 3 outstanding years. He was previously at Winthrop. He has coached for 12 years. That doesn't always mean that moving to a bigger school. We know that, unfortunately, with Archie having success at Dayton and didn't get it done here at Indiana, but he is a highly successful coach. Not sure. I dug a little bit on the roster. A name that we will all recognize is Chucky Hepburn, transfer from Wisconsin, the point guard with the really big hair. And they don't have a lot of size. So the initial thought, as I saw this come out today, was our post presence is much better than Louisville, but Louisville loves to shoot the 3, and Indiana had trouble last year guarding the 3 early against lesser quality teams. Listen to these stats. They were 32 of 78 in 2 summer games in the Bahamas. They took a trip to the Bahamas and played in that, or I believe in the same arena. I'm not 100% sure of that. They took 78 threes in 2 games. They won 111-59, 111-71. Competition, I don't know much about that, obviously. They had 7 in double figures in the first game, 5 in double figures in the second game. The thing that stood out to me in looking at College of Charleston, if you want to see what kind of basketball that Louisville will play, 3-point shooting, they like a heavy pace. Indiana likes to go inside and attack the rim, so it's going to be a couple of different styles in that first game. And the thing is, we don't have a lot of time to see them. I think the best game that Louisville plays ahead of the Battle for Atlantis is November 9th. If you want to scout them, go to the IU-Michigan football game and then record their game against Tennessee. So they're going to get a real test early by playing Tennessee. But College of Charleston per game last year had 7 stats inside the top 25 of college basketball. They were 3rd in 3-point attempts. They were 8th in made threes. They were 11th in bench points, so I think you're going to see the rotation, as we talked about, 7 people in double figures. 18th in winning percentage, 20th in rebounds, defensive rebounds, and 23rd in offensive rebounds, and 22nd in assist to turnover ratio. And that's the stat that I want to end probably segment 1 with. In the game, they had 38 assists to 14 turnovers. In the game 1, they had 22 assists to 12 turnovers. So this team, just gelling together with 10 or 11 new guys, new coach, goes down and has 60 assists in 2 games. So, again, I don't know what sets they run. I don't know their scheme offensively. But if you are sharing the basketball at a 60 to 26 ratio in the first 2 times you're on a court, that you could tell that there's an emphasis of really moving the basketball and probably moving people. It's going to be a high-paced Pat Kelsey Louisville basketball team that Indiana's going to have to be ready to really play and guard and close out on those extra passes. So that's just a little bit of what I looked at what Kelsey did at Charleston. What Louisville did in their 2 games at in the Bahamas. So wasn't planning on this, but I do see a question, and until I get Jerod back, I will answer any questions that anyone has in the chat. What are your thoughts on Rice and Carlisle defensively, Coach? I think they have the size and the length to be able to guard. I haven't watched a lot of their film of their play in the Pac-12 to know defensively what to have an opinion. You know, you always look at the offensive tapes in the 2 or 3 minutes when you have transfers. So I think your question is very important, though, because ball pressure, I know, has been an emphasis this year from a source that they're really trying to contain the bounce, and that helps in guarding the three. And so, you know, last year when Xavier was out, I don't know that they had the ball pressure that Mike Woodson wanted to have, and that put a lot of pressure on other players defensively to help, to block shots, to rebound, and do everything else. I think Rice and Carlisle really have that length and that ability, that athletic ability to probably be really good defenders. The question is, in year 2 for Rice, or year 3, you had a red shirt because of medical reasons, and then Carlisle in a second, playing in a conference that's was a lot more competitive than some of the Pac-12. I don't have great thoughts on that, but I do think they have the body type that I would want for my perimeter defenders. If you have a question real quick, throw it in the chat. I will answer that as we await. If not, I'm going to go on to the questions from in segment 3. But let's do a short break here, and then we'll come back. So coming up on Assembly Call Radio, I'll talk about those questions that I was asked on the podcast Feed the Post. I'll ask Jerod, and when Andy gets here, I'll ask them, which get into some specifics as we had the question about Rice and Carlisle. We can get into some of that, and then we'll come back also in segment 3. So if there's any discussion, put it in the chat and stick with us here on Assembly Call. All right, hello everybody. Glad to be here. It's always good to get back with the guys and talk basketball. And wasn't planning necessarily being alone. It's kind of dangerous to have me on here all alone because I could just go off on any tangent that anyone wants. So if anyone wants to stir up some stuff, just again throw something in the chat. But Jerod will be here momentarily. I do think the Louisville was a really good. You wanted to get Louisville, Oklahoma, or Providence in the first matchup to give you a chance to win, and those teams can have a chance to get better. And then you try to get in that winner's bracket with a pretty good win, and then you want to go get the big guys. I don't think you wanted to play Davidson right away other than to get a win, but Davidson's pretty good. All those teams are pretty good. You could lose to anyone in there. But I'm glad they avoided the big ones and get a loss and thrown in. You know, it's going to really be hard to beat Arizona or Gonzaga regardless. So, okay, a couple questions I'll answer here during the break, and then we'll try to formally get to segment 2. Good questions here. On the topic of struggling to string together good games, what is behind that? Keys to fixing that? That's an excellent question, and I guess if I had to answer, I'd probably be very wealthy on the podcast circuit or the books, but you have to have consistency of process in practice so that your fundamentals and your belief in your scheme becomes secondary to players. You can get ready for a game or two and scout and take something away, but if you don't have, I think, just solid fundamentals, and that's not a comment about the coaching staff or anything. Sometimes some teams just don't get the complete package of everything that you want to do. The keys to fixing it is just solid practice and making sure that basketball becomes a habit. Good basketball becomes a habit because athletes under stress default back to their level of training. And so you have game slippage all the time. And the good teams have a small amount of slippage from where the coach wants them to what they perform on game night. But when you see wild variances of performance, you have a good game, then you have a bad game, you have a lot more slippage in those games. They are reverting back under certain pressures. Maybe it's a team playing a certain way. Maybe they feel it's a must-win game. But then they revert back to their level of training, And some games they can exceed that level, by excitement, fans, home court, those things. And that's where I think you see some up and down play. And the key for me is just your process. You have to have a process. You have to have a system. You have to have players that buy in it and raise that minimum level of what you accept. And then you emphasize the hell out of the things you want and emphasize and emphasize and emphasize and emphasize. And even that's no guarantee. If you're just out-talented, you're going to get beat. But I think when you see teams go up and down, I think that they are struggling. Either the team is struggling to get the message from the coach or the coach is struggling to get the message to the players to the level to be consistent. I think that's a great coach. I don't know your name here, but Nobles 408, thanks. I don't know that I answered it terrifically because there's so much to that. But in general, fix your process. Will Galloway be ready and healthy? I think he will be. I think he's been out for a while. That's a question on like who's going to start early in the year or how many minutes. Will he be on a minutes restriction? We can only hope that he's completely back. I do think Justin, this question came from Justin Beard, that I do think if he's missed a lot of summer and they've implemented some offense and defense, I think he's a coach's kid and a team kid that if they came to him and talked about a role of coming off the bench, he could be a really good asset off the bench if Carlisle or someone else gets Indiana off to a better start and they can nurse him with some minutes so that he's really ready to go late February and March. I only can hope so. I haven't heard anything from any sources one way or the other on that. The state of basketball, how you guys doing? I need to get on your podcast. You're probably top-level podcast. You don't want me to drag it down. But if you don't know, check those guys out as well. They talk about all the teams in the state. The great state of Indiana basketball is tremendous here. So shout out to those guys. Other than in the Bahamas, any other non-con losses acceptable? Acceptable, yes, in the fact that sometimes things happen. South Carolina was a tournament team. They're coming into Assembly Hall. You can get caught looking ahead to the Bahamas there. I think with the Big Ten, the nice thing about the Big Ten is you can always overcome it with good road wins in the Big Ten. So you don't want to accumulate any losses outside of the Bahamas, to be honest with you, with this schedule. But, I think losing to a Winthrop or someone like that is just it's not good from a bracketology. It's probably not good for the program. And then again, there's just a lot of stress around the program in a variety of opinions that we just really need a smooth season and get a 3 seed or a 4 seed and have a chance to get to Sweet 16 and just like basketball again. I think we all want that regardless of where people are about the program. So I don't think any loss outside of the Bahamas is really going to be helpful for a lot of those things. All right. I'm going to jump down here while we're waiting again for Jerod. Keep the questions coming. I'll just riff on this for a while. Favorite pie, anything you guys want to know about before we jump into section 2. I'll try to go down and see some questions that we have. I'm going to jump to this right away because it's somewhat of what I'm going to ask the guys when they come back on. Joey asked, how would you rate our off-season if our only additions were Tucker, Rice, Carlisle, Bile, and 2 replacement-level travels? Let's say for the sake of this exercise that one of them is a replacement-level big man. And I don't know if that's a leftover one. Here's the questions I'm going to ask the guys. And I'll ask you guys out there. Who's the most impactful transfer? Indiana got 6 transfers and a freshman and Tucker coming in. But who do you think is the most impactful? Put your answer into the chat. I am going with Miles Rice. I think Balo is the highest ranked and will be good and very, very important. But I think Coach Woodson loves good – well, who doesn't love good point guard play? And I think while I don't think he's Jalen Hood-Schifino, Indiana's best success came in 2023 when Jalen Hood-Schifino was there backing up Xavier. Xavier gets hurt. And Hood-Schifino, when he played at high levels like he did at Mackey, I think really impacted the game of basketball with his passing and with his pull-up game. And we have a bunch of guys that can hit the pull-up, but I think your point guard for Mike Woodson really can direct things, and he puts a lot of trust in the point guard to call certain actions, to call certain plays, to get the ball where it needs to go. And Miles Rice is impressive because he's overcome some health issues sitting out his freshman year and then had an outstanding first year. I just think that he's going to be the most impactful player transfer that has come in. I don't mean to put a lot of pressure on the young man because there's a lot of talent on this team. But I think the answer comes down to either Ballo or Rice in that question. It'll be interesting to see what Jerod thinks and what Andy gets, and that's not taking anything away from Carlisle as a transfer as well. But I just think point guards, everyone makes fun of me about point guard and guard play being so important that I just think that he's going to have a good chance to be the most impactful player. And we have Andy Bottoms home from soccer. We're in the middle of between segment 1 and 2. I'm just kind of answering questions. So how did soccer go tonight, Andy?
Not great.
Uh-oh. Well, let's go to something else then. But welcome to the show today, and thanks for popping in. We expect Jerod to be here any minute. We got rid of Ryan quick enough on his birthday night. He said he had dinner. I don't know that was real true or anything. But how are you doing, Andy?
Oh, we're hanging in there. Like I said, I got home earlier than I thought I did. Thought I could get on and help you out, and then of course the internet was not very good. So hopefully it's all right now. Feels like we've got spots in our house lately that work much better than others. But oh well.
Let me go ahead.
What did I miss in segment 1, Coach? Since I
was just going to get to that here in the intermission. We talked about the battle for Atlantis. Your thought. We talked about a lot of things, but we'll quickly get your thoughts here, and then I'll transition into segment 2 again. Your thoughts.
I mean, not a terrible draw. It's kind of what we thought it would be, right? Like you didn't know who you were going to play, but you're trying to set yourself up to be able to play either Arizona or Gonzaga in the semifinals. So to do that, now you got to beat Louisville, who a year ago gave IU a better game than anybody would have thought. And I think there's just lots of reasons to believe with Pat Kelsey that they're gonna show some fairly big improvement this year. In some ways, the fact that you're playing them pretty early in the season is probably a good thing. They've got tons of new pieces because of all they had to do in the aftermath of Kenny Payne. So it might be one of those things where it's a good time to play them. I know IU themselves is integrating a number of different pieces, but at least there's a little bit of holdover. There's really not any holdover at Louisville. So, maybe you get that, but I think Kelsey has always been a guy that people were waiting to figure out where he was going to go, has had a lot of success at Charleston, and really just for whatever reason hadn't taken different jobs or wanted to move and kind of pick his spot. So I think he's going to be really good there for IU's sake, hopefully later rather than sooner. But I think it's a winnable game for IU as you look in there certainly were weaker teams that you could draw. But if you spin it forward a little bit, and if you think that he's going to get things together over the course of the season at Louisville, that's a win that might age pretty well versus there's a couple of the others where, I don't think West Virginia is going to get dramatically better if you would have played them. I don't think Davidson is going to have a chance to be a good win. So I think there's some positives in it, but it'll definitely be different because you don't have a great sense of what Louisville is going to be under him with so many new players, although at least I guess IU's got a pretty good idea what to expect from Chucky Hepburn. So you got one less guy you need to scout, I suppose, but we'll see.
I did find this, Andy, in getting ready today. They played in the Bahamas already, 2 games. They played against a team from Calgary and the Bahamas Select, won handily. But here's the stat I shared in segment 1. They took 78 threes in the 2 games. And they made 32. They shot 45% from 3 on 32 of 78, and they had 60 assists. So either those 2 teams were really not good, or Louisville really likes to play at a high pace and jack up the three. It's going to be a schematic difference there between what Indiana likes to do and what I think Pat Kelsey's Louisville Cardinals want to do.
Well, yeah, and if you look at, I'm trying to look on KenPom here pretty quickly, but I think that Kelsey has been one who they definitely want to play up tempo, and they took a ton of threes at Charleston a year ago. So I'm trying to look and see whether that's that's been pretty consistent over at least the last 2 years, and probably 4 of the last 6. They were in the top 50 in 3-point attempt percentage. That has definitely been a hallmark of him. There's been 2 seasons with him where they were outside of the top 100 and maybe even outside of the top 70 in terms of 3-pointers taken. So I think that will hold. I think, to your point, some of the assist numbers may be a little bit inflated, but I think it does give you couple that with what he's done at Winthrop and at Charleston these last couple of years. That is likely what you're going to see. I don't think there's probably a lot of secret about that. So at least you'll know that will potentially be a stylistic difference that we may see from what IU does.
Have the Bears and the Lions on one TV and IU and Louisville on the other on your thanks. I guess that's Wednesday.
Yeah, I think that's Wednesday.
Thanksgiving Day is next. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and officially get segment 2 started, and then Jerod can just join us when we go. So
all right,
here we
sounds
go.
Good.
What's up, y'all? It's Devontae Green giving you the green light to watch Assembly Call after every IU game. Just don't listen to their opinions about shot selection. Remember, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. Go Hoosiers.
Welcome back to the Assembly Call. I'm the coach, Brian Tonsoni. We had Ryan Phillips on. He's off celebrating his birthday, probably stuck in traffic is what he said, on his way to dinner. But Andy Bottoms is home from supporting his daughter on the soccer fields, and he joins us. Jerod will be here after bedtime, and we're going to talk a little bit about Indiana's roster, some positives and questions going in. I was on the podcast called Feed the Post. I mentioned that earlier in segment 1 with Joe Jackson of the Boilers in the Stands, and he does a nice job in that, covering all of the Big Ten schools. And if you're interested in that, go to YouTube, Feed the Post, and you can see what he says about UCLA. And he did a transfer video. So there's 2 or 3 Indiana videos with Joe, one of which is with me. And Andy, I thought he asked some really outstanding questions that really made me just think about this roster going forward. And I thought that we would at least discuss those here in section 2. So I'm very interested in getting your opinion. We are in the middle of the portal era, and we are going to get transfers. Indiana is kind of right in the middle of where the NCAA is. Some teams have to go out and get 10, 11, 12 or decide to do that. Some teams do not, are not very active in the portal, and then Indiana has a split. They have 6 guys coming back and 7 new guys coming in. But in your opinion, of the transfers, who do you think at this point might be the most impactful transfer that Indiana got this summer?
I think the one who probably needs to be the most impactful is Miles Rice. To me, Ballo, I know it was ranked higher in a lot of the portal rankings and things like that, and certainly will be a force inside for IU. But if you look back at what IU was missing so much of last season, from a guard and a playmaking perspective, with Xavier Johnson missing so much time, I think the arrow points directly at Rice. A wise person once told me that this is a guards game. And so I think that if you, to the extent that you believe that wise person, I think that makes him a little bit more of the clear choice. Cause I don't think there is, if Ballo got injured or Ballo got injured, you could do some things with Renew there. You could do whatever. Rice, I think Cannon Carlisle is an interesting player. You're going to have Gabe Cupps another year older, but Rice, if you're giving him the keys right away, I think has a chance to be really impactful. Also a guy that will potentially be here for a couple years if all goes well. And I think with him, slowed down a little bit toward the end of last season. I think everyone rightfully so chalked a lot of that up to he was coming back off of beating cancer, and really you think about how guys who aren't going through that also just wear down over the course of the season, and think about how that that wall might be magnified for a guy who went through what he did medically. I think you can look at that and say he's going to be stronger as you get another year removed from that. You come into this season and be able to put him in that position. So I think some of the numbers that he had may not look as good by the end, but I think clearly an impactful player on a good team a year ago, and one that IU really needs to step in from a guard perspective to be the guy with the keys for the most part. And there'll be some shared duties in the backcourt, I'm sure, but I think he is the one who needs to be most impactful. Whether he will be or not remains to be seen, but he would be my pick for that.
I think I went along with that on Joe's podcast. Miles Rice was my choice as well, and we just talked in the clips, and everyone's highlight video is good plays. No one sends out a clip of their bad plays, but he seems to me to be able to play with poise on the offensive end, to attack hard when he needs to be under poise and take a jump shot if he needs to, or find the open man. And I really think, I'll add to what you said, I think his assist to turnover ratio, that might be my ride or die stat of the year. If he can have that 6 or 7 assist games on a somewhat regular basis, I know that's hard to average that, but if he is mindful of, while he's attacking, to go get his and then go get others and alternate that as needed, I think that impacts Indiana. As you said, I just, the other person would be Ballo. Anytime you get a player of that, caliber of player in the post to continue Indiana's post presence, I think he will be impactful. But I like your terminology there, the one we need to be most impactful, as opposed to will be. So going along with that, who is the X factor of all 13, or the X factor stat, if that's not a person, but what's the X factor for Indiana's success this year?
Boy, it's an interesting question. I think there's a lot of intriguing options. I'm trying to think of guys who maybe are down the pecking order a little bit, who are not ones that you feel like you know what you're going to get coming in. So the couple guys that stood out for me in this, there's kind of three that, at least if you look at Torvik, are kind of lumped together. And so this is clearly a cop-out answer by giving you three different guys. But the three that came to mind for me would be Kanan Carlisle, Luke Goody, and Bryson Tucker. I think Tucker is probably the biggest X factor because he's the most unknown, that nobody's really seen play against college level competition. So I guess by true definition of what that would be, maybe he's the one that floats to the top of that list. You hear great things about from him from an athleticism standpoint. Think is a guy who could play different positions. If he really buys in defensively, could be trouble on that end of the floor. And so I think he's one that I think there's a pretty wide range of outcomes, because you just don't know, how does he earn playing time? What does he do with it when he gets there? But so I think he would be one. Carlisle is a little bit of a wild card to me, not necessarily from a talent perspective, but just if you fast forward to the role that he's going to be asked to play for IU versus what he was asked to do at Stanford. It's kind of what you said. You look at some of the highlight tape, and you're obviously not putting bad stuff out there on the highlight tape, but there's, he's taking tough shots. He had a lot on his plate that he's not going to have this year. So do you get a more efficient and better version of him than what you saw at Stanford? And I think that would give IU somebody else that's strong in the backcourt, another playmaker there, as we talked about with Rice. It's important. And Goody is probably, the most of what you can get and expect out of him, because he's got the most experience. Someone wandered into a dentist office here, and they got the but Goody, I think you've seen the most of him, so you kind of know what you're going to expect. But I think the X factor part of him is more, what role does he play on this team, or how much does he play? I think he's a guy who some games may not play a ton, other games may get a lot of run, and the X factor skill that he has that IU has lacked at other times is the ability to stretch the floor and shoot it a little bit. So his argument for him is probably a little bit different. I think his is more an X factor in terms of how much playing time does he carve out, and what is think we know the kinds of things he's expected to do, but how big of a role can that really be? So I'd probably take him in the order that I talked about him if you had to try to pin me down and not let me give a total cop-out answer.
Yeah, and not stealing. I want you guys to go watch the podcast that Joe had, but I went a different tact on that. I think I agree with what you're saying, but I think Malik Renew defensively with his effort, his reduction in fouling, and to me, he got rebounds. He had decent rebounding numbers, but there were times when he wasn't active as a rebounder, and I think that to me, all the other pieces. But if Renew can be complete, like he's really good offensively, Andy, I think he can score. I know he can shoot the three. If he has a little dribble game or can he initiate with offense, I think that's where his game is really, really, really good. But I think he needs to be, as the junior, the third-year player, think he needs to be a stalwart on the defensive end, especially when it comes to the rebounding. And I think that – for me, X factor is what's going to maximize Indiana's wins. Get them to the ceiling or blow by the ceiling, right? And there's so many things, Andy, I think that we could pinpoint, or players that if they play well in certain areas are going to, there's just a lot of questions.
Yeah, I think with Malik, it's a really good point because you look at the jump that he made from freshman to sophomore, which was really good. Part of that was just getting to play more, but it was also having a year under his belt, being a year in the weight program and all those things and being able to step up and do that. But ultimately his role in a lot of ways as a sophomore, I would say, was just an expanded similar role of what he did in spurts as a freshman. I think what you need from him this year becomes a lot different than that. You need him to take another leap, but because you have Ballo now, you could do some different things with Ware, and he could be the outside guy and Renew could be the inside guy last year if you wanted to, play them both together. If you want to do that this year, you don't really have that same luxury. So how does he, to your point, evolve his game really on both ends of the court? Certainly defensively, as you said, is a big one to be able to keep himself out there. But I do think, your thought process in that makes a ton of sense because he's one that his game needs to transform from year 2 to year 3, maybe more than it transformed from year 1 to year 2. It just was expanded in year 1 to year 2 versus now it probably needs to be a little bit different.
Well, we'd like to welcome Jerod onto the podcast. Glad to have you here.
Nice to be here. And sorry for the audio issues there for a moment.
No problem. You were just acting like me. I'm the one who usually has all the issues, but we're glad to have you. Ryan had a nice 25 minutes, and then he's jumped out for his birthday.
Did I miss cake?
Soccer.
Did you guys sing to him? And
no, I didn't sing to him.
I didn't make it. I didn't make it for that. So
no, you didn't.
But,
all right.
So we Ryan and I did a pretty good in-depth dive of the battle for Atlantis. If you'd like to share some thoughts, go ahead. But
did he just spend 10 minutes bitching about the early tip time?
Oh, of course. I mean, it wouldn't be one of our shows if he didn't have a problem with the early tip time. That was discussed. But I asked Andy, and I was asked these on the podcast, most impactful transfer, and then Andy just got done answering the second question about the X factor. Go ahead and take it any way you want on, which transfer is most impactful, and then on the other hand, what's the X factor, either player-wise or, issue-wise for Indiana to reach its ceiling?
Well, it's an incredible transfer class. There's no question. So you could make a case for a lot of those guys. And I think, we're going to walk away from a lot of games saying, hey, Ballo was the best player, or Carlisle went nuclear and won this game for us. But I think it's Miles Rice, because consistent guard play is just so important. And we've known that, but we were beaten over the head with it, unfortunately, last season, due to the injuries, the inconsistencies, all of that stuff. And it just really highlighted, it's interesting. About an hour and a half ago, I retweeted, I think it was Hoops Herald, tweeted out this quote from Bob Knight talking about how, defense, you can't guard a good dribbler. And so defense is about help and helping the helper and understanding that. And of course, at the heart of that is just how effective having good dribblers are who can actually break down a defense and get in there and create and put pressure on both the guy who's guarding them and the help defense to help create openings. And it's just something we didn't see enough of last season outside of some of those games when Trey Galloway really got himself going. And so, and that's what Miles Rice should bring. Even though he's only a sophomore, obviously, his game is mature. He's mature just through some of the life experiences that he's had, and just kind of the way that he carries himself. And so I think that as good as the other players are, I just think that is so important in today's game, so important for this program, and particularly important for how Mike Woodson wants to run offense, that I think he's the obvious answer for most impactful transfer. And it's not even to take anything away from the other guys. It's just a testament to how good I think he is, the potential for him to make a sophomore leap, because that's typically when guys make their biggest improvements, and just how important that position is. So I don't know what you guys said, but I would assume it was probably something similar.
We all agree that whether he will be or should be, there's a lot of should be because of the point guard play and the need to do a lot of the things that you said. But all three of us picked Miles Rice. If there's an X factor at this point of the season, I know there's a lot unknown. We don't know who's playing what, but what's the X factor? Either a player, or as Andy did, 3 players, or just an area of basketball that for Indiana to go to its ceiling and above.
Do you want to make your case for the other 8 players as X factors too, Andy?
Hey, look, we haven't been on in a while. You gotta make up for lost time and get in a lot of different thoughts as you're going.
Okay, I'll approach this from a few different directions. One, I think there's an X factor skill. And I think the biggest swing skill for this program, and it piggybacks off what you were saying, Andy, is Malik Renew's ability to face the basket and play away from the basket. Because he's an incredible post player. Just his footwork, his confidence down there, his skills, his ability to finish with both hands. I think his improving ability to pass. Obviously, he's got to get a little bit better at recognizing the doubles and making quicker decisions. But if he can step out and credibly be a guy who can, knock down a 15-foot jumper or, hopefully make some threes. And we saw some of that last year. It came in spurts. What did he make, 4 or 5 against North Alabama, and was up over 40% for a while. Because we don't have Khalil Ware who can threaten people from outside. Umar Ballo is, I'm going to be down on the block, and for the 13 to 15 minutes a game or maybe more when those guys are playing together, for that to work in a real way, you got to be able to create some kind of spacing. And so I think if Malik can step out and be a guy who can make plays as a shooter, as a passer, maybe even a dribbler a time or two away from the basket, that would be huge for unlocking the full potential of those lineups. Those lineups would be good anyway because the talent is so good. But against the higher level teams that Indiana needs to start beating, they're going to have to, be able to be more versatile. And so I think Malik Renew's shooting and just ability to face the basket, I think, is the biggest X factor skill. I think the biggest X factor player to me is Bryson Tucker. And I say that because I think he's a guy who may struggle a little bit early to find his footing, like a lot of freshmen do, but that kind of size, that kind of athleticism, he does bring the ability to hit a mid-range shot, which are going to be shots that this offense creates. We know that. And so his ability to hit them is going to be important. And I think he's a guy who could come along. If you think back to 2016 and the way that OG Anunoby and Juwan Morgan came along and provided a real shot in the arm for that team in January and February, I'm not saying Tucker is going to be as good as those guys, but his recruiting pedigree is better than both of them. And so if he can be that kind of guy, that's a huge additional piece now that you have in your 7 and 8 man rotation. And whereas in past seasons, it's really felt like we've had to count on freshmen, like they weren't really X factors. They were kind of guys that you needed. I think Tucker has a chance to be the true X factor, which is, I think if he struggles all season long, this team can still be good. If he comes along, this team can be great. And I think he has the kind of talent, to be able to do that off the bench. And then I think the other X factor to me is just Mike Woodson's ability to put all the parts and pieces together. And that's in a lot of different ways. How do you, approach the beginning of the season? Are you committed to, basically playing, doing the line changes, or are you really going to focus on, hey, we've got to go out and just win these games by a lot of points. That's got to be our focus. Does the offense change? Are there defensive adjustments that, kind of fit what this team does? Coach Woodson has at times adjusted and in seasons has made adjustments as we've gone along, for sure, which we've talked about. But I think really, seeing him in his 4th year in college basketball, able to adapt his coaching style a little bit more to the college game and the realities of the college game is another X factor. And again, if he doesn't do that, Indiana's gotten a 4 seed with him coaching the way that he's going to coach. So it's not like, all is lost. But if he can do that and show a little bit more of that ability, I think, to fit what he's brought from the pros into what you need to do in college, that's something else that I don't think it's fair to count on it happening, because we have 3 years of evidence, to kind of look at. But if it does, combined with the talent that this roster has, that could be something else that at the margins, each of these things that you're talking about here, if that helps you win 1 or 2 more games, that could be a 3 to 5 game swing, and that's kind of what you're looking for in the place that we think Indiana is going to be, which is a floor of probably pretty good, just because of the talent. But if we're going to be great or elite, those are some of the things I think that could take us there.
Well said. And as we get ready for the season, it's a couple months away. What positives are you feeling about Indiana basketball wise, Andy, going into the season? For me, it's going to piggyback a little bit of what Jerod said. The depth, I think we can withstand some injuries, some foul trouble better than at any time.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure he froze. You had the same look on your face.
Oh, okay. Coach froze. Sorry, I
Yeah.
thought I froze there for a second.
No,
okay, Andy,
I
so
was
what are the
having
positives?
internet issues earlier as well, so I thought it was me for a minute. So everything is great.
Yeah.
So positives for me, I think the biggest one, while there are a lot of new faces coming and you're trying to figure out how those parts fit together, you've got a team that has played collectively a lot of college basketball. Not together.
Just a hell of a show we're putting on tonight.
We're working through it. So I think that's one thing. I think you've got a group who has some experience to fall back on. Hopefully they coalesce and can play well together. But I think when you look at it's one of the potential benefits, I guess, of getting in the portal, where you do have guys who have that experience and are a little bit more seasoned than bringing in guys, fresh out of high school. So that's it. That's probably the biggest positive to me, is it's as experienced a team as IU has had in quite a while, and probably somewhat of a statement on the state of college basketball. But I think that's one. And I think the other, from we talked a lot about the transfers and who's new coming in, but I think a second year of Mackenzie Mbako is a real positive. He made such strides over the course of the season, and by the end was playing so well. And as we all know all too well, it's not a foregone conclusion that a guy that started out playing for you is going to be back the next year, whether that was the NBA, whether that was transferring, whatever the case may be. And so I think to be able to see if he can continue on that trajectory of growth, what he can be as a sophomore, and the threat he can be offensively, can he continue to improve defensively? So I think that's something that I'm really excited about as a returning player, to really see his continued evolution.
Andy, I'm back. You guys hear me now?
Yeah, you're good. We both thought it was us for a little bit at first. So
yeah, no. So all of my devices shut down for
perfect.
About 10
Everything's
seconds.
going great.
But I think that's a really good thing that is a lesson for me, and maybe a lot of people too, is that I think Indiana might be approaching this portal thing in a decent way. There is those teams that aren't hitting the portal and just building like normal. There are teams that are getting 11 or 12, and I think that's going to be very difficult. But you have enough veterans and people who have played for Mike Woodson who understand what he wants, and then you bring in real talented people. And all of the frustration of a 19-14 season, maintaining some players is a positive. I think that's a really good point. Jerod, your thoughts on the positives as you see it at this point heading into the season?
Yeah, I agree with what you guys said. I like the blend of experienced guys that you kind of know what you're going to get. Ballo, Malik Renew, Trey Galloway. It doesn't mean there isn't room to grow for those guys. We just talked about one for Malik Renew, but those guys have skins on the wall. They have produced at a good level. But then I really like the fact that we have several freshmen going into becoming sophomores, which again is where guys typically take their leap, that have a lot of potential, in Rice and Carlisle, and especially Mackenzie and Mbako, who I think some people might classify as an X factor for this team. To me, what he showed over the last couple months of last season, after he put the really tough start behind him, removes him from X factor status to me. I expect him to be a consistent contributor. One question that we can, talk about at some point that I batted around with some folks in Discord earlier this week is, who's going to be the leading scorer for this team this year? I think it's going to be Mackenzie Mbako because I believe in his shot that much. And I think with what, the creation that you're going to get from Rice and Carlisle and Trey Galloway, I think he's going to, have a lot of open threes. Now, again, this goes back to the X factor of Coach Woodson. Are we going to feature that more in the offense? I think if we do, Mbako is a guy who could really capitalize on it. And so I think that combination of experience with young talent where it's really easy to see some of those guys making a big leap, that's a nice mix. It's an exciting mix that really gives this team a ceiling. And I should have mentioned Luke Goody. He's another one of those experienced guys that'll kind of be a rock, and if some of those young guys are struggling, you can put Goody in, what you're going to get from him. And that's helpful, and we haven't had that kind of depth and talent and balance, where you've actually got guards, you got big guys, you got wings. It feels like for the first 3 years of Woodson's tenure, there's been a lot of whack-a-mole, especially with the roster. It's like, well, this is good, but this isn't. And right now you look at the roster and it's like, I'd like to have maybe a little more proven depth behind Oumar Ballo as a big guy. But I mean, other than that, the roster really kind of fits well together, at least on paper. And so without having to stretch, like we certainly spent time in the offseason kind of straining and, talking about, well, if this happens and this happens, like this could all happen, you don't have to strain as much. Like when we're talking about Rice and Carlisle and Mbako making leaps, even if all they do is repeat their freshman year production, that's still pretty good, especially in comparison to what we've had before. And so that's nice is you're not counting on guys to make big leaps to be competitive like we were last year with CJ Gunn and Caleb Banks and others. And look at a guy like Gabe Cupps, right? Who, this has been a program that's just been starved for guard play. He was a freshman who was forced into a lot of minutes. It's felt like in most seasons, you'd really be counting on him as a sophomore to come back and boy, we really need him. And he is going to play some important minutes, I think, but it's nice having him in kind of the 8th, 9th spot on the roster where it's not that he's a bonus, but you're not counting on him to have to carry a heavy load. He can come along, hopefully, at kind of the more reasonable level you're expecting last year. So it's just nice to have a roster like that where you look at it and it's like, okay, this makes some sense. This is a top 25 roster. Now let's go do it. Let's prove it, all those things. But it does feel farther along at this point in the offseason than what we've been the last few seasons.
Totally agree that this is the best roster that Mike Woodson's had when he's been the coach at Indiana by far. And that's kind of – I said that the other day on the podcast, and then I thought, well, we had Jalen Hood-Schifino and we had Trace Jackson-Davis, but 1 through 13, I think there's no doubt. And the last question here in segment 2, fellas, what questions need to be answered in order for Indiana to be at its ceiling? Andy, what questions do you have heading into the season?
I think the obvious one is just how well all the pieces fit together and how these new guys buy into whatever role that they end up slotted into, whether that's coming off the bench, playing different position maybe than what they did in years prior, playing a different way, whatever. I think that's one of the big questions. The other one is, I think we can ask a lot of questions on the offensive end, and I guess the track record is the track record, so I don't know that we're going to expect something dramatically different. What I would say, though, is the question is on the defensive end. Can this team get back to what they were doing early, the first couple years of Mike Woodson's tenure? He 24th in adjusted efficiency on the defensive end his first year, 45th. That dropped all the way to 84th, and that was something that he has said was to be a calling card of what they needed to do. I think they've got the pieces. I think they've got some different guys that can be matchup challenges. On the defensive end, can guard multiple positions. Does that give them more flexibility to switch and do some different things there? That part remains to be seen. You've got a good rim protector in Ballo. But there are questions on that end. You talked about Renew and trying to foul, to keep him out of foul trouble. We talked about Mbako if he's playing the 3. Those are scenarios where he got himself into some trouble a year ago. So how do they rectify some of the things that they did on the defensive end and get back to that? Because I think that will, for as much talent as it feels like there is, I think that's something that they've really got to get shored up. Especially as you get into conference play to be able to reach the goals that they're going to have for the season. And hopefully the offense comes around. I think there's just enough talent there where it probably it almost inherently gets better just because of that. The guard play should be elevated and things like that. How much better it gets, I don't know. But I think you can reasonably expect some improvement there. But on the defensive end is they got to take a big step back to get to where they were, 2 and 3 years ago.
And Andy, where it's really going to pay, we talked about Louisville before you guys got on here. They took those 78 threes. They're going to play up tempo and shoot a lot of threes. And Indiana early and maybe often had trouble guarding the 3-point line. I know it's been an emphasis in the program this summer to apply some ball pressure, and maybe we have the depth and the kind of guys that can guard and put pressure on the ball a little bit better than what we did last year. But they're going to have to get the defense going early. Is a question. Can you get your philosophy, Mike Woodson, to these players in November and not January or February when Indiana has played better under Mike Woodson? Last year's 5-game winning streak is kind of an example of that. Every year it's been like 12-6, and then Indiana goes on a run as they figure things out. There's really not room for that with the schedule on that. But your questions, Jerod, as you take a look at this roster and this program heading into this season.
And what you described is kind of that NBA mentality that we've talked about, where in the NBA, when you have 82 games, you can ease into the season. Indiana cannot ease into this season. You can't, because Atlantis is so important and you can't afford to stub your toe in the other games. So you've got to hit the ground running. And I have a lot of questions defensively too. I think Mbako, Renew, and Ballo, everybody projects those guys to start at the 3, 4, and 5. Mbako and Renew didn't come back to sit the bench, and Ballo didn't come here to sit the bench. Now, as the game goes on, with foul trouble, with Ballo only being a guy who plays 26, 27 minutes, there's going to be a lot of mixing and matching. But those 3 are going to share the court together a lot. How does that work defensively? There's a lot of questions about how that works, especially in certain matchups. But my biggest question, you guys talked about the 3-point defense. Is this team finally going to feature a modern shot diet? Because I think they've got the guys to, there have been some seasons, obviously, where the shooting, skill wasn't great. Some others where the percentage was pretty good, and you'd like to see some more taken. I think this team can be a good shooting team. I think Mackenzie Mbako, love his mechanics. I think he can be a 40% plus guy. Luke Goody has already proven it. Carlisle and Rice were a little bit inconsistent, but they have the statistical profiles of guys who shoot in the mid-30s as sophomores. That's 4 guys right there that you should be able to count on as solid 3-point shooters. There's no reason for them to not be taking 2 or 3 threes a game each. And that's just them every single game, if not more. But the way Indiana has played the last 3 years, that's not something that has happened, And so I want to see a little bit more of that, because especially if you're going to struggle a little bit with your 3-point defense, which, I think is fair to expect a little bit because of what we've seen, you've got to counter that on the other side. You can't constantly be on the negative side of this math problem or efficiency problem, whatever you want to say, where you're constantly having to trade 2s for 3s. The quantity that you need to do that, especially against good teams, just gets really, really hard. And I think we have the guys this season to do it. And so I want to see that emphasized. And it's a question because, to your point, Andy, we haven't seen it. I mean, we've been in the 300s and 3-point volume every single season. I don't even want to go back. I mean, how many times have we been in the 300s and 3-point volume in the last 7 seasons? Is it every year? It might be, except for maybe 1. Yeah. And that's, you can't win basketball games like that consistently. With the perfect kind of roster, maybe you can, and Indiana's found success, being able to do that. But again, as we look for ways to go from good or really good to great, I think that's one of them. And it's a big question because we just haven't seen it.
To answer your question, 263rd or worse in each of the last 7, and 299th or worse in 5 of the 7.
Okay. So only 5 of the years. That 299 really doing some work there.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
a little different than
There's another 291
70
in there too. That's the next one down. So you can, if you want to set the cutoff at 290, it's 6 of the last 7.
It's a little different than Louisville's 78 threes in 2 games, right?
And by the way, I want to call out Justin in the chat because he is absolutely right as well. We have to rebound better. Tom Crean actually had a great tweet this week talking about how if your guards don't rebound, you aren't going to win.
Yeah.
And I think that was a great point. Xavier Johnson was a good guard rebounder earlier in his career at Indiana. It really fell off, later on. Indiana has to be. It's one of those things. It just hasn't felt like an emphasis, because the fundamentals and I don't want to say the desire, but maybe more the focus on it, just doesn't, based on just what we see on the court. We don't know what they do in practice, but it just doesn't seem like the kind of thing that's really been emphasized. And I think it's important. Now, Ballo will improve. Ballo's an excellent rebounder. Malik Renew has a lot of room to grow as a rebounder, but I think he can be good. Mackenzie Mbako, I thought, was a very solid rebounder as a freshman. So if you can get the guards, in the second half of the season, if you can get the guards doing it, that's another place where I think Indiana has a lot of room for improvement. And I think they have the guys to do it.
Well, Jerod, the reason you fall from 24th to 84th is you don't finish defensive possessions, and that's what Justin's saying. You have to rebound better, and all 5 guys have to be active in the rebounding process. That doesn't mean all 5 guys have to go where the basketball is, but you got to have – I talked about this on that other podcast – prevent offensive rebounds. It's not necessarily about the rebound numbers or stats because there's going to be a certain number that people are going to get, but are you doing everything on a consistent every defensive possession consistently to prevent guys from getting rebounds? That might be blocking out your guy. That might be cracking down if someone goes to block a shot. That does, Justin, and Jerod, you guys are spot on.
Luke Goody will help with that too. He's a solid rebounder.
Got to rebound. The whole process of rebound, not just the accumulation of rebounds, is extremely important. Okay, coming up on Assembly Call Radio, we have some really outstanding questions that the 3 of us are going to tackle from all of you in the community. So we'll bat those around next, but stick with us here on Assembly Call. All right, everybody, we'll quickly jump into segment 3 here. But again, welcome. Thanks for being here. Thanks for being a patience in my monologue time in between Ryan and Andy.
Was there monologue time? How long was the monologue?
10, 12 minutes or so. I kind of went through some Louisville stuff and answered a couple questions and just kind of made it the break between 1 and 2.
He was workshopping some stuff for an open mic night. I mean, it was really good.
Some new material.
That's where we were.
Some new material for class. I was doing a lot of things, but no, I think that the thing that I was really, I think I was talking to Ryan about this, but doing that other podcast forced me to look at the roster as opposed to all the other stuff of the 19 and 14. Like that conversation and tonight's conversation has kind of made me kind of forget about all that stress we all felt about 19 and 14. Yes, there's some questions, and it's okay to ask questions, but who's the impact player? I really appreciated being asked those because it put me in a good frame of mind to really analyze where Indiana basketball is without all the other stuff going on. And I really got kind of a little rejuvenated nice. with Joe's podcast and our discussion tonight. So
good. That was Joe Jackson, right?
Yeah, he does
Joe's
such
podcast.
a good job.
He does great work.
Young guy,
great work. Don't normally like promoting Purdue guys, but Joe he does good stuff.
No, but this Big Ten work is better than his Purdue stuff. So, and then I always I'm on there and I talking about IU and I bring up Hood Schifino at Mackey. It's just a little fun dig to those guys all the time. So, all right, let's go to segment 3. Here we go.
This is Jordan Halls, and I never miss a shot or an episode of the Assembly Call.
Thanks, Jordan, for listening tonight. Send us a text with any ideas or let us know how the team's looking. But we appreciate you and what you did this summer on the TBT tournament.
Please reevaluate your priorities if you actually are listening.
Yeah. No, man, he should be listening. There's some great advice from Ryan every once in a while. I'm the coach, Brian Tonsoni. I'm here with Jerod Morris, Andy Bottoms, and thanks for joining us here on our show tonight. It's time for our mailbag. All these questions were submitted via our private IU basketball discussion community on Substack, which you can learn more about if you go to assemblycall.com. Okay, I'm going to turn this over to you guys because I don't know much about this, but Sean asked a great question because it is confusing. Can we get a rundown on what streaming services we must have to watch all of the games? If they keep getting split up among several services, then it becomes difficult to keep track of who carries IU men and women's game. Jerod,
easy
what
answer.
do you know
All
about
of them.
streaming?
You need
all of them.
Yeah,
basically.
Get them all.
Yeah. Okay. So the first thing is you want to have something like YouTube TV or cable that is going to now. I don't. Gee whiz, I don't even know all of them, but that's going to give you ESPN, typically Big Ten Network, Fox, FS1. So that's going to cover some of those. And I think like typically with FS1, like I have their app, and I have to sign in through my dad's cable account to get that on the app, and so there's some of that goes on. But getting something like YouTube TV is going to cover a few of them. Then you need BTN Plus, because there's always one or two games that are on BTN Plus, and then women's games will be on there, and obviously other sports. There's going to be games on Peacock. And then I'm a little unclear with the new deal. Are there going to be new games on Paramount and some of those other ones this year, as soon as this year, or no?
I don't know.
That's CBS related, right? Paramount Plus is tied to CBS.
Well, yeah, and CBS, obviously, you need cable or YouTube TV or one of those to watch. So, yeah, I mean, we'll list them all out because the schedule hasn't come out yet.
I was going to say, I don't think they've given them yet what they will be. Yeah, the Paramount
I
was the only one
I share the confusion.
I'm not sure about, but
yeah, I mean there will be games on Paramount in the future. I'm just not sure if that starts this season or if that's beginning next season.
Yeah, I don't know.
So we'll check on that. But you're definitely going to need Peacock. You're definitely going to need BTN Plus, probably for at least 2 months, because typically what they do is they do one game in November, December, and then another one in January or February. So you have to have it for at least a couple of months. But I will say, as much as we rag on BTN Plus, they have a lot of programming on there with some of Indiana's other sports, like volleyball, which has become a really exciting Indiana sport. So there are reasons to keep BTN Plus if you can afford it. And during that, the month or two when you have to have it, there's some other good stuff on there. But yeah, if you're going to get YouTube TV, which you need now for Sunday Ticket, so a lot more people are getting YouTube TV, that is going to cover, probably 60% of them. And then you'll need some of these other services for the others. But we'll talk more about that once we get the actual schedule and see where all the games are, which will probably be in a month or two.
As I say, I know last year Peacock ran a pretty good deal around Black Friday because that's when I got my year of that, which will be up, I guess, before we know it. But yeah. So I don't know, but yeah, usually once they put that out, they'll let you know where they all are and figure out how to time out what to get, how long to keep it, all that fun stuff.
Yeah.
Now Peacock you probably need for some football games this year, I would guess too. So to the extent that people
and then you need
excited
Thursday
about that,
then Amazon Prime for
but I even
mean
for IU football because they're having Big Ten games on Peacock. So
yep,
I know I needed to watch the Eagles Packers opener in Brazil. I believe it's on Peacock,
yes.
So
yeah,
nice.
Hard to keep track of. I'm going to go to a couple questions real quick that I think are real short answers because I think there's one that's that can be a little lengthy. Want to get that in before we sign off. But Coach Marlowe asked about recruiting speculation as we head towards official visits. We've just officially decided to kind of relax a little bit, Coach, on speculation because we just don't know. We're if you need recruiting information, then there are other sites that'll be. Pigs and Inside the Hall do a lot better job than we do. Obviously, he said he thinks Mullen should be priority one. I am of the agreement that if your Indiana guys are 5 stars and the whole country wants them, it would be nice to get them. So I kind of agree with you. You guys, any quick thoughts on our new stance on recruiting?
Yeah, the only note I'll add on Mullins, he had a good interview. I think this was on Pigs. But he's had a couple interviews. Where I believe he's going to try and make his decision before the season starts. The only concern there is, obviously if you're, Mullins, his parents looking at Indiana, he is a shooter and he is a wing shooter. And we just talked about how our offense hasn't featured a lot of, focus on those types of players. Now, he has said in interviews that he's talked with the coaching staff and they're really talking about new stuff they're going to do and things that they're going to do to feature him. You'd kind of like to have a little bit of on-court evidence, to really see it, I would think, because of how skilled he is in that area and given the heavyweights you're competing with. I mean, UConn and others that you're competing with. But hopefully, the pull of home is strong enough to keep him here, because I agree. He's the type of guy that you really want to get. He's the type of player that really good college basketball teams have. And so, hopefully he ends up deciding to want to stay. And then hopefully Indiana's offense expands this year and you can really envision even more how a guy like him is going to fit in with how Indiana wants to run offense.
Phil asks, is Ja'Kai Newton healthy? Any injuries to be aware of on the rest of the team? I think he's rebounding, obviously, from the year that he sat out Trey Galloway with his knee issue we are unaware of. Andy, have you heard anything with those two that we know about going forward?
No, I really have not. I think Ja'Kai is a pretty big wild card. It seemed like there was, a lot going. He's been through a lot already, but I don't know kind of where he's at in his progression. I think with some of the guys they brought in, it puts a little bit less pressure on him to really kind of rush and push back too hard to get there. But I don't know any more than that. So I haven't heard much and don't know that we'll see a whole lot until you get out and see if he's doing stuff at Hoosier Hysteria and things like that.
I think Ja'Kai, it's a developmental year for him, given the talent that is ahead of him. And there's nothing wrong with that, because then he can be one of those guys that has been here a couple years to mesh with transfers down the road. That's the kind of guy you need if you can keep him, obviously. But coming off an injury and not having the experience, I think he's going to be healthy, but I think he's going to have a backup role. Jerod, anything about the injuries or Ja'Kai?
Yeah, I don't know anything about Ja'Kai. I saw Trey said that he is, expecting to be fully healthy. He had surgery this offseason. I guess maybe that's a little bit of an X factor. Is just how healthy is he and how ready is he right at the beginning of the season to, kind of reassume the role that he played last year, where he really, improved as a playmaker. And obviously, if you can add that Trey Galloway to Miles Rice and Kanan Carlisle, and that is a really dynamic backcourt trio that can play together. Obviously, you can have one of them coming off the bench. It just gives you a lot of options. So hopefully he's healthy. He says he's healthy. So I think until we see otherwise, I'm assuming that, it's full go for Trey at the beginning of the season.
Andy, I think this is a good question if you need to bounce out of here to end on. John asks, I would like to hear a good old-fashioned floor ceiling expectations from all of you this season. We don't have a lot to go on quite yet, but right now, where's your floor and ceiling for this Indiana Hoosier basketball team?
Boy, that's a great question. I think the floor needs to be, given what they brought in, given the NIL spent to bring in some of the guys and kind of what they've done there. I mean, I feel like you need to be top 5 seed. Feels, maybe, I don't know. I think you need a challenge for the Big Ten in a year when the league is going to be pretty wide open. I think you need to be toward the top of the league. So maybe that's top 4. I don't know. And I think if you do that, like, I don't know, maybe top 6 seed, but that puts you in kind of like top 25 territory in the country. I think that's not unreasonable. At an absolute bare minimum, have to get back to the tournament, but I feel like that's setting the floor pretty low. Ceiling wise, the roster doesn't lack for talent. I think that one becomes hard to answer without, seeing how the pieces fit together. I don't know that this is a Final Four type team, but could they get things together and get to an Elite 8? I think that's maybe the ceiling. And I think the other thing with the floor is that you probably need to win at least one game. I think it would be great to get to the second weekend, and whether that's fair or unfair is a floor expectation. I don't really know. But I don't think sneaking into the tournament is nearly good enough based on the money spent on the roster and the guys that they brought in, and especially coming off of a disappointing season a year ago. A lot of different reasons for that, but the reality is like needs to be a pretty big bounce back. It feels like. So I don't know. Off the cuff, I guess that's what I'll say. Curious to hear what you guys think about it.
Yeah, and we're taking this question from the standpoint of everybody stays healthy. There's no like debilitating injuries, that kind of thing. It felt like, Andy, it felt like you answered the question a little bit more like what the standard or expectation should be, which I think is, and I think the way that you described it is correct. I mean, I think like the fair expectation, right, is, this should be a top 3 or 4 team in the Big Ten that is legitimately competing for the title, like not 3rd or 4th, but you're 4 games behind. Like if we're just talking about down the middle, what's the minimum for success, which is different from the floor, but what's the minimum for success is that, and then, winning a game or 2 in the tournament. Like you got to do that to even think of a successful season. The floor, look, I think the talent is good enough that, the floor is probably being a bubble team, but still making the tournament. I mean, I have a hard time thinking with this talent in the conference the way that it is, with this schedule where they're just going to rack up a quantity of wins. I mean, again, unless there's total disaster, but I don't really foresee that even in a worst case scenario. I think the floor is you're a bubble team, but you still get in. And as far as the ceiling goes, I mean, I would really prefer that no one check the tapes, but I'm fairly certain I said the ceiling of last year's team was the Final Four, with the experienced guards coming back and the expectation of CJ and Caleb taking steps forward. Now, none of that happened, and we didn't get anywhere close to that. But I think the ceiling of this team, if things go well, if Malik Renew can step away from the basket, if Bryson Tucker becomes a player, if Mackenzie Mbako is a first-team All-Big Ten type player, and I don't think any of those things are crazy. We always talk in the offseason about all these questions that we have. We talk ourselves into, if you answer them all in the positive way, well, that's what the ceiling is. And I think reasonably this team could make a Final Four. I mean, I guess any team can make a Final Four if the bracket opens, but I think even just with a normal tournament set of tournament opponents, I don't think you have to squint too hard to say this team could be in the bucket of teams that reasonably could make a Final Four. Now, would they be good enough then to win it all? Boy, that's another question. I don't quite think they have the balance, or I don't think they have enough. I don't think they're dynamic enough to win against the teams that we've seen win titles the last few years, which has been UConn. They don't strike me as that kind of team, but I can envision them, as a Final Four participant that maybe enters the Final Four as an underdog, just because of the talent and because of the guard play. To be a Final Four team, you've got to have guards that can go off. Kanan Carlisle is the type of guy that can go win you a tournament game because of his offense. And Miles Rice is the type of guard that can keep you in tournament games because he's that solid. And then you add the other thing. So I don't think it's crazy to say they have a Final Four ceiling. And as far as the floor goes, again, I think being on the bubble, I just can't see it being worse than that unless it's a total disaster. And that would be something that's kind of unforeseen, and that's kind of silly to try and project.
Yeah, I'm with you on the floor as far as what's the worst that could happen this year. I think is that bubble team in. I think there's just too much talent to win. I do worry if things don't go well at the battle for Atlantis, then you're definitely in that not getting a top seed. I've said I think this team is reminiscent of, I think it's better than 2023 overall, but I think the results are going to be very similar. And what I think is the ceiling is a 3 or 4 seed with a chance to play in the a second weekend tournament team. And then if the matchups and everything gels and when the if statements, I can't say this is a Final Four team. I think this is a second weekend team.
I'm not predicting the Final Four.
No, but I'm saying I can't get there because I just can't. I don't think it's I just don't think it's that good to say this is the ceiling is that. Do I think that any team like this with roster can find the right matchups, play well, and win a couple games? But you've seen teams that you've had 1 seeds that get knocked out early and don't make it to the Final Four and technically aren't Final Four teams when it all comes done. I think this is a second weekend team that should challenge for a Big Ten championship, get a Friday slot in the Big Ten. I think that's the limit with what we've seen demonstrated from this program for the last 3 years. I cannot get excited about Final Four or get my hopes up like that until I see demonstrated consistency in a lot of areas, and that's just the way I am. So ceiling, second weekend, Sweet 16, Elite 8 kind of opportunity, Big Ten championship competitor, and get a 3 or 4 protected seed, wear white jerseys on game one. I think that would be the top of where they can go. We don't want to talk about if our floors are wrong, because
But we certainly think this team has Big Ten title ceiling, right? This team can win a Big Ten title in this Big Ten.
Yeah, I would
Ceiling.
say so.
Again, not predicting it, but
Yeah.
I think they're in the bucket of teams that you wouldn't be shocked if they won the Big Ten, right?
yeah, I think
Or
that's
maybe-
fair.
Okay.
I think that's fair. I just think, you know,
Like, I don't
if
think
you're
they
talking-
will. I wouldn't predict it, but I think they can be in that mix.
Yeah, I think that's fair, because you just don't know who's at other schools either with all this transfer portal, and then how those teams are going to gel. And there's always teams that pop up, and there's always teams that fall backwards. So prediction versus ceiling, I think, is a very good way to define that. I cannot predict that, but I think they should be in the running for it.
Yeah, I think the other unknown about the Big Ten this year is the new teams, the even more unbalanced schedule, the different travel, how those games lay out, and that's what we don't know yet. We know who they play, we don't know when they play them, and kind of how those different pockets of the schedule may come together in a way that is helpful or harmful as you look through it that way, and how that works for other teams. But yeah, I think there's just a cluster of good but maybe not great teams at the top of the Big Ten that, if you get on a little bit of a run, could be there. So I don't know that they'll be as clear a favorite as there has been in other years, for sure. So all right. Well, I'm gonna drop. I'll let you guys finish up, but good good catching in with you, and
Good to see you.
sorry I
Andy.
couldn't be on sooner, Coach. I was, like I said, thought I was gonna make it even before Ryan got off, and the internet had other ideas, as it often does. So
It does.
anyway, all right. Well, we will talk to you guys soon, and thanks, everybody.
Cool. See you,
All
man.
right, we'll see you, Andy.
All right, Coach. Should we tackle these other questions?
Yeah.
By the
let's,
way, I do want to mention on this floor ceiling conversation. So I saw on Twitter today, there's that ridiculous account. It's the college football kind. I think it's like Big Game Boomer or something.
yeah,
And it just
I'm aware of that.
throws crap at the wall to get engagement. So today they put out this graphic that was the floor and ceiling for every college football team. Like, I don't want to cast aspersions, but I wonder how much rigor went into really predicting these floor and ceilings for each team. But what I did love seeing, I went to the Indiana football floor and ceiling. Did you see this? Did you see what the
I did not.
floor was for
No.
Indiana football? The ceiling, I think, was 9-3, and the floor was 6-6. I'm like, man, every
Here
IU
we
football
go.
fan, like, you mean a floor of 6 wins? Like, does this person know
Let's go.
the history of
Let's
Indiana
go.
football? Like, there's a lot of IU fans that if you told them you could have 6 wins right now, they might lock that in. No, I wouldn't, because I think this team is capable of more. I think you can make a reasonable argument this Indiana team could win 7 or 8 games just based on the talent, some of the Big Ten questions, and the schedule. But I don't know. There was just something about seeing a floor for Indiana football of 6-6. I was very disoriented for a moment, but
No.
I think it's a
Pinch
testament
yourself.
to the trust people have in Signetti. So it was great.
Yeah. I love Signetti and his approach, and so there's some excitement there. But I'm stuck in I'll be happy when I see it mode. I have been crushed a lot in my Indiana fandom. It's kind of like my Chicago Cub fandom. You know, if we win, I'm going to get really super excited, but I know that we're going to be marginal most of the time. And when I see it, and I don't know if that's fair. I still have all my IU stuff. I'm still a crazy fan, but I can't get to the overhype that I've had in the past.
Which is
when
a
you go
great
through the
segue.
schedule.
Which is a great segue to Bob's question.
Yeah, I think we should answer that in an upcoming one, though. What do you
In
think?
an upcoming episode?
Yeah. Or do you think we should fire away at it?
I want to talk about it. I think we should answer it now because I think
Okay.
there's an interesting angle here, because I think there may be some competing things at work. So here, I'll tell you what I'm talking about. So Bob, this is Bob Thompson. And plus, Bob Thompson has earned the right. If he submits a question, he gets it answered.
Oh, absolutely.
That week.
I just thought maybe it'd be a whole separate conversation segment type thing.
I think it's going to be an undercurrent of discussion all the way up until the start of the season. So Bob says, I got to be honest, I have no real excitement for this season. This is partially because I'm all about the SIG train for football. So unlike you, he's all aboard. He's ready for Signetti. And that's just around the corner. But I also think that Woody burned most of my goodwill and optimism last season. And I've had many similar conversations with other longtime IU fans that have expressed, a similar sentiment. He says, I'm usually perpetually optimistic about IU basketball, and I know we have some really exciting new players, but I just can't get there right now. While I'll always root and hope for the best, I'm fully in the camp of I'll believe it when I see it. Is this fair, unfair for me? So he's essentially saying for basketball what you just said for football. And I think there is, I don't know how to estimate how big it is, but I do think there is a decent chunk of IU fans, loyal, supportive IU fans who will be there watching the first game and going to games, still there to support the program, who are keeping it a little bit more at arm's length than they have in the past. I think it's a cumulative compounding impact of the ups and downs and overall lack of success, kind of over the last 8 years of Indiana basketball. I think just the tone of last season, not just the results, but the tone of how that season went, has contributed to some of it. And I think, I'm really noticing, Coach, with fans of our age, especially and older, kind of a struggle to figure out what to do with college sports right now. Now, Bob says he's in for the football program, so it's not like he's, feeling this for everything, but you've expressed this too, where and this gets in a little bit also to the news that broke earlier today about Indiana seeking corporate sponsorship for Assembly Hall and for Memorial Stadium, which, for those of us who grew up when we did, the thought of that, especially at Assembly Hall, is just, it's like being in a nightmare. Like it's something that you would have never expected to happen. And so I think in addition to the results for Indiana sports being so up and down, there's this upheaval in college sports overall, where I think most of us are very happy that the players are getting their piece of the pie. It's not that. It's not players getting paid, at least for me. I'm happy that that's happening. But there's a lot of, I don't know if collateral damage is the right word or ancillary impacts. There's a lot that's going into that, which is, now because schools, especially if you're trying to compete at the Big Ten level, there's this pressure now to have as much money as possible, to be able to reach this, $22 million that I think is, supposed to be the spending limit based on this new, the House deal or whatever it is. So colleges are scrambling to figure out how are we going to make money. Heck, Colorado had some staffer go to Saudi Arabia to try and lobby their fund to get money, which it just that's not something that you expect from college sports. When you read, I think Matt Brown, had a tweet where Ohio State's, I think it was either the AD or president, was talking about how, they're probably going to have to not cut the Olympic sports, but, reduce some of the funding. And those sports are going to have to operate more at the club level. And there's just some things that we didn't used to associate with college sports that are happening. And, my reaction to Indiana seeking corporate sponsorship from Memorial Stadium and Assembly Hall, my visceral gut reaction is I don't like it. It just doesn't feel right to me. It's not what I grew up with, and it's weird. And it just, I don't know. It's hard for me to fit it into kind of my thinking on college sports. And yet at the same time, I'm glad Indiana is doing it. And I support them doing it, because if you're going to compete in college sports, then you might as well put 2 feet in and don't go with half measures, but go with full measures. And so I think there's a weird cognitive dissonance happening in a lot of people's minds in a macro level when it comes to how we're experiencing college sports, and at a micro level with Indiana specifically, where with football, there was this great promise of 3 or 4 years ago that just the floor just opened and we all thudded to the ground, because that, the great season where we were ranked 16th or 17th, as soon as the Iowa game happened, it's like, oh man. And then that season was just a disaster. Last season with basketball and the ups and downs and just the bad losses. So there's this weird space where it's like, I don't know what to trust, and the ground beneath my feet is shifting so much. And I noticed this more again with fans kind of our ages and older, where it's just a weird time to be a college sports fan. And it's making us think and say and do things that I think are a little strange, and not maybe the way that we were, 4 or 5 years ago or beyond that. And so I think, when I read Bob's question, I think there may be some of that in there. I certainly feel that. I know other people have. And so, I'm trying not to be alarmist. I'm trying not to be negative about it. I'm trying to really be open-minded and give it a chance. But there's just visceral parts of me that feel a little bit less emotionally invested in what I'm watching. It's like with basketball. This roster is awesome, and the individual people are awesome. Miles Rice is a great story. I think Cannon Carlisle is a great kid. Umar Ballo is just a terrific player, and seems like an awesome guy. Luke Goody is a kid from Indiana, who came back. Like, each individual story here is terrific. And yet, look at the amount of time that we have invested with this roster. It's not a lot. We have Trey, we have Anthony that we've been with for 4 years. We've had Gabe and Mackenzie and a couple of these guys, but that's not a long time. You don't have a guy like Trace or a Yogi where, that at a star level where you've seen him grow and you're looking for them to take that next step. And I think a lot of the real special seasons have a guy like that, and so there's just, that combined with some of the other stuff. I understand. I guess what I'm saying is I empathize with Bob. I'm probably a little, more excited than what he's describing, but I get it. Like, it just feels, things still feel weird. And I'm guessing that'll probably change by November when the actual games start, because now there's, less of this conjecture and focus on other stuff. And it's like, okay, there's a basketball game. I know what to do when there's an IU basketball game on. I root for Indiana. But some of this stuff in the offseason, man, I find it very disorienting. And it doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. It doesn't mean it's wrong. And it doesn't mean I support Indiana going all out to succeed in the new landscape. But it's weird. And I haven't fully embraced all of it yet. I'm going to do my best to get there. But I always liked college sports over pro sports because there were some differences. Now, some of those differences I'm glad are going away. I don't need players to not get paid to support them. It's not that. But the transient rosters and just some of this other stuff that I just described, I don't know. It's strange. And it's just making me feel differently than I used to feel about the whole experience. And I don't want it to, but I can't lie. Like, it just does,
I think it is totally fair, Bob, and I would say that I am exactly where you're at. And so I think, Bob, there are more people that are feeling the same way that you are about the upcoming seasons, than you would maybe tend to believe. So hang in there, Bob. I have chosen to root for the uniforms. I've done this for years with baseball, where there's a lot more unknown players and transfers. And then when you go to Bart Kaufman, it's Indiana uniform, and you root for them, and then you get to know the players. And so that's the mindset that I'm trying to get with the transfer portal in football and the transfer portal, and it's different. We have taken a hit a little bit in the last 8 years, and then the up and down with football, as you mentioned. For me, after my heart issue, my approach to the passion that I had for tailgating and all-out crazy support went to some different priorities at home and just in my own life, some different things with, the bracketology stuff. And other things became a little bit different after that event for me. But you spoke what the changes in college athletics have just hit me like a ton of bricks. And again, I don't disagree with them. I think there's a lot of good that's happening, but the amount of money in everything these days that is driving what once was, I thought, just a different league than the pro league. Again, so once I see the candy stripes, I'll be okay. And that night, if Indiana wins, I'm going to be extremely happy, and I'm going to be going on the post-game show and excited about, Miles Rice dropping 20 and doing that. But the amount of investment, emotional investment has definitely taken a change for me in the last 2 years. So, Bob, I think that's more than fair. And that's where I thought this was something that could have been a whole segment or episode as we all go through it and coalesce together. But I hope, Bob, that answered your question there. Rick says between eligibility, pros, and transfers, it's possible you could have 9 to 10 scholarship openings next year. Is this seemingly yearly trend of massive roster churn concerning, or just the new normal in college basketball? I'll throw out a couple thoughts and then I'll turn it to you. I think there's 3 methods that are going to go forward. And you're starting to see them in college basketball, and it'll be interesting to see the success level, not only this year, but in years to come, depending on which method you take. I think the trend could be you reject the portal and you still build the way you did with freshmen and second-year and third-year guys. I think you see Purdue's and Marquette and, to some extent, Michigan State's doing that kind of thing. Can that win, and can that win consistently going forward? Then you have something like IU and UConn have done, where you have a couple, 2 or 3 guys like Klingen at UConn and now Renew here at IU, and then you bring in some really good transfers to kind of augment your returners and your glue guys, right? Half and half. Indiana brought in 6 transfers, a recruit, and then had 6 returners. And then you have the teams that will totally revamp a roster. You have Illinois, who totally cleared out and had of 11. You have Louisville, who because of a coaching change had to do that. How many teams just totally? Musselman at USC has done that with Arkansas every year, almost a whole new roster. Yeah. What wins? And then the biggest question for me, Jerod, is what wins consistently? I think some of those methods have some huge outlier up and down seasons because of the fact of what we talked about gelling, getting your scheme in early, winning big games in November. Some years it could really work out. Some years the team just doesn't mesh. And Indiana, I think, was that last year. Brought in some really good talent, had some experience coming back, and a lot of things worked against Indiana last year. But that's my guess of the trend of where programs are going to decide to operate in. Your thoughts?
Yeah, and I think it just means there's going to be a whole lot more volatility in college basketball, and make it very, very hard to know from year to year who's going to be good and who's not. Now, I think, if you have one of the elite coaches, that's going to help you smooth some of those things out. But, to Rick's question, and we'll see, how Indiana chooses to approach it going forward. But yeah, if you look, he says 9 to 10 openings next year. That sounds crazy. And yet we know Ballo, Galloway, Goody, Hatton, Leal, and Dallas James, the new backup center, who we haven't, talked a whole lot about. I don't think he's expected to get a whole lot of time. He's more of a practice player, I think, and a depth piece. But that's 6 guys right there that we know are going. Unless, I don't think any of those guys have eligibility left because the COVID years are over. You've got Renew as a junior. Now, he doesn't project as an NBA type guy. But if, he certainly is a guy who, everybody could transfer, but maybe if Indiana doesn't have great success, he wants to, see what the grass, if the grass is greener somewhere else. And then Carlisle, Cups, Mbako, and Rice, who knows? Again, if you have 6 guys going, is it crazy to think that 3 of those other guys could transfer, Newton or Tucker, young guys, if they don't get enough time? So yeah, it is possible Indiana could have 9 or 10 guys. It's probably more likely that it's 7 or 8, but I would say it would be fair to expect that every season for Indiana, at least half the roster is going to turn over. And maybe some years it'll be a little bit less and some years it'll be a little bit more, but it'll probably be about that every year. I don't like that. I really don't. Now, I like that Indiana seems well positioned because of NIL to take advantage of it. So from just the cutthroat, I want to win basketball games, there's a reason to think like, hey, this system is kind of good for Indiana. But as a fan, I really much prefer, I prefer winning. So that's the thing. I want to win, but I also want to see guys grow. And I like having guys around for 3 or 4 years as a college fan. That's why I do this. That's why that's why I get invested in college sports. So, it's hard, but I think we should assume, and until Indiana has a coaching change, they're certainly not going to go the Marquette, Purdue, Michigan State way. Like, we're not going to do that for sure. I think it's more likely that we go the other way of, bigger upheaval than it goes backwards. So I hope it stays in kind of just maybe churning about half the roster every season, because I don't see it being a lot less than that. And if it leads to winning, then, if we end up going on here and reaching a Final Four, we'll probably look back at this conversation and be like, man, remember in the offseason, we were talking about how bad this is. Winning sure is fun. And that is true. I just wonder if it's going to feel like something's missing. And I don't know. I hope we get to that point. I'd love to be able to have that conversation after we win big. And I'm hoping that's what happens. But it is, yes, something to prepare yourself for, I think.
And it's just what I talked about with baseball. Baseball's not as watched, unfortunately. I think IU baseball and Coach Mercer does a great job. But every year there's a new second baseman or a new outfielder or something, and you didn't really know a whole lot about them. And then by the third or fourth game, they're hitting 350, and you're like rooting like crazy when they jack one out of the park. That's the mentality that I haven't had for basketball because I've been in that build. And you look at I love looking at the scholarship, tables on inside the hall, right? And those things are changed. And so I think that all ties together, goes back to Bob's question there. Ross, early expectations for non-conference record and conference record. Go ahead, Jerod. Just a quick guess, I guess, on that, or maybe what we want or need to have happen.
My expectation for the non-conference record is 1 loss. I honestly, I think that's the floor. I think it needs to be at a minimum 1 loss. I think Indiana could go win Atlantis. I mean, Gonzaga and Arizona are obviously good teams, but Indiana's talented enough to go win Atlantis, and I hope they do. They definitely need to win the first game. But, if they go in there and they lose a game to Gonzaga, or Arizona, that's not the worst thing in the world, but you can't lose any of the others. You can't lose to South Carolina, and you can't lose any of the other bye games. And as far as conference record goes, the Big Ten is wide open. I think, once again, Indiana's going to have as much talent as anybody. But as we know, talent isn't the only thing that matters in the Big Ten. You got to go on the road and play tough games and tough coaches and tough venues. I would say my expectation is Indiana loses 1 non-conference game and goes 14-6 in conference play. Now 14-6, depending on what kind of Big Ten season it is, could be competing for a Big Ten title, or it could be a game or two out. I think 14-6 in this Big Ten without an elite team is going to be competing for, first or second in the Big Ten. Which again is kind of my middle of the road. Here's what I think is going to happen. I don't trust things enough to think we'll be consistent enough to be better than that, even though the talent could be. I mean, I think this team could go 16-4, 15-5, but I would say probably 14-6. So that would be my expectation, is 7 losses and then whatever win total that gives you, with, again, a ceiling of a couple games better or a floor of a few games worse if things don't go well. But that's my expectation.
Yeah, I think that's probably where Indiana should be.
Yep.
I think you can survive a second loss because the Big Ten will have some teams that are pretty good. And again, if you go into the Big Ten and win some, if you end up 14-6 in the Big Ten and you lost a game you shouldn't have lost in the non-conference, you're gonna get a pretty good seed. Those numbers. But
it may be 1 less than you would have gotten otherwise.
True, but you can survive that.
Yes.
And especially in those exempt tournaments too, where you play back to back to back. I think the committee takes some consideration that you didn't have time to practice, didn't have time to scout. Those. I know we do this in bracketology. If you play good teams and lose in there, it's not as bad. You win, it's a boost. You lose in some of those, unless you lose to bad teams, it's not really a negative because it's so abnormal. You usually have at least a day in between, if not 3 or 4 days in between, even in the tournament. Yeah. So I think you could survive a 9-2 non-conference. I think you can't go below 12 or 13 if you expect to get into the tournament with a white-colored jersey on in the first weekend. But I just don't know a lot about UCLA is supposed to be on the rebound, and you don't think teams that get 10, 11 players in are going to be as good as what Indiana has. But you really don't know in this environment. That's one of the bad things, again, about the previous questions. You don't know. Everyone who's doing a podcast for their Big Ten team loves their roster right now, right, and thinks their roster is going to achieve at the ceiling. There are injuries and coaches' decisions and players' attitudes and all of that have to happen. But every podcast for all, 28 teams in the Big Ten, they love their roster right now, and they think it is going to maximize their wins. That's what fans do, and it's a beautiful thing about college basketball. But yes, every coach at the Big Ten meeting, we had a great summer. We got bigger. We got stronger. We built some fundamentals, and then someone's got to be at the bottom 6 teams, and 3 teams don't get to the tournament or whatever the rules are, right? So I'm trying to split that. I think this is the best team that Mike Woodson's had. So 14 and 10-1 and 14-6 going in the tournament sounds about right. I'm saying it's going to be somewhere between 12 and 14 and 9 or 10, and I still think that gets you a pretty good season. Not maybe where we want it. But that's where I'm looking at. Again, part of the Bob Thompson stuff to kind of, when I see it, I'll believe it, kind of thing.
14-6 may be a tad aggressive. If I had to bet money, I would probably say 13-7, actually, thinking about it a little bit more. That's probably more likely.
Yeah.
Again, I think I won't be shocked if they have 5 or 6 losses in Big Ten play because the talent is there. But it's still going to be a competitive Big Ten, and we just haven't seen this team be consistent enough. Coach is frozen. Okay, we'll go on to the last question here. This is from Daniel. Why doesn't
the thing?
Keep going, Coach.
No, I'm just saying in 2023, we were the 2nd seed in the Big Ten tournament, and we were 12-8. And we didn't expect Northwestern to rise that year and be really good. Like even last year, we didn't expect Nebraska to have the season. So there's so many unknowns that I think 12 to 14 is the range, and I think 9 or 10 is the range. And when you get below that, then there's some problems, is what I'm saying.
Well,
And
this is to Andy's point. The schedule really matters. I mean, that year that we were 12-8. We had single plays against the bottom 6 teams in the conference, I think it was, and Purdue had double plays against all of them. I mean, you can say that doesn't matter, but it probably does. You flip the schedules,
absolutely.
And it's very possible, because Indiana swept Purdue that year. It's very possible Indiana's, 1 game out or tied with them, and the schedule is going to matter even more. So that's another variable to throw in here that just makes some of this offseason talk and predictions kind of a waste of airtime.
And exactly. And who you think is going to be the bottom now.
Yeah.
Sometimes there are those, they either get to the middle or, Michigan was thought the last 2 years to be one of the top 4 or 5 teams, and they bottomed out, right? So you have a single play against them, you're pretty happy until you figure out that they had a really bad year and would have loved to have played them twice. So those things will work their way out. But I think that at worst, that's 21 wins going into the Big Ten tournament. I think we're going to see our name called on Sunday, and unfortunately that at least is where we need to be. Maybe not acceptable, but we got to be in every year now going forward.
Yep. All right, last question here from Daniel. I can read this one, Coach. He says, why doesn't IU, men's and women's, agree to more home-and-home deals with some sort of gate split with Evansville, Butler, Fort Wayne, Valpo, etc.? I understand they need 17 home games, but for the long-term health of the program, having 16 home games and 1 road game each year in a corner of the state makes sense to me. I love this question. It's a question that gets asked every offseason, and I think in an ideal world, Daniel makes a great point, and that should happen. I would love to see more games against in-state teams. However, I'm going to quibble with an assumption Daniel is making here, where he says, but for the long-term health of the program. The truth is, and this is the reason this will never happen, for the long-term health of Indiana's program, they can't afford to split the gates on one of these games. They need to bring in as much revenue as they can from their bye games. And that's why this is never going to happen. Plus, all the upside here is for the Evansvilles and the Butlers and the Fort Wayne. I mean, you can take Butler out a little bit since they're in a bigger conference. There's not a lot of upside for Indiana, and colleges are not looking to split revenue with these schools because I don't think you're not going to gain now unless you did it like as an exhibition, as one of your exhibition games, like maybe, but I don't even think there. Like, unfortunately, this has just become impractical in the current landscape of college basketball, both because of money and because of, what happens to a school like Indiana if you lose to, I don't know, a team like IPFW, as Tom Green did, back in the day, and so it was that was Archie. Archie did that. Indiana State.
They both did.
And
they lost twice to him.
Oh, we both did. Okay. Well, even better. But anyway, I would love to see those games be played, but it's not going to happen, unfortunately. And I understand why. There are rational reasons why it's not going to happen, even if it kind of sucks.
Daniel, I'm with you, and I would say more than one. I mean, I get it, and Jerod is absolutely correct about revenue and all that, but it's another negative for me in the college landscape, and especially the college basketball landscape. The state of Indiana is a fantastic basketball state, and we don't play people within this state is absolutely it's just negative to me. And again, maybe I'm an old man, get off my lawn. And again, there's so many things that have changed that I've tried to accept. But playing Ball State and Evansville, or even IUPUI, the state of Indiana is a fantastic place. It's part of the reason why I held on to the Crossroads Classic for as long time and think it needed to expand to have 8 games and bring in some of the teams like Evansville to play Evansville Ball State in that day and have 2 days or whatever, like celebrate basketball in Indiana. But we are so money driven in this world that it's never going to happen. And the coaches who make $5 million, exactly as Jerod said, or $6 million a year, don't want to lose to IPFW. In state, they don't want to travel and play at the Holman Center because of the disadvantage. And I just think it is cowardly in some ways because it's a give in to money, but you're backed into a wall. If you don't, you're not going to win anyway. So it'll never happen. And I think it's a farce.
Think about this, Coach. Like the NBA started their in-season tournament, right? Which was awesome. I thought the NBA in-season tournament was great. I think it's a cool thing. Imagine if they did an in-season tournament with just like the state of Indiana schools, like pick 8 or pick 16, right? And you can use a couple regular season games as like the early games in the tournament. And then maybe the teams that win go on to a Final Four played in December, and yeah, typically it would be Indiana and Purdue there and, probably a Notre Dame or a Butler, some of the top teams. But imagine if a Cinderella, snuck through, or if Indiana and Purdue got to play a game that didn't count in the Big Ten, but was for, the Indiana State basketball title. Like that would be incredible. It would be a lot of fun. It'll never happen. And I understand why. And I'm not advocating for it to happen, but those are really fun things that it would be nice to have space for in college basketball that we just don't. And it's kind of a shame. I get it.
Let me throw this out to you.
I don't like it.
Because it'll never happen in the regular season, but why not relax some of the stipulations in the summer and have local summer leagues?
Yes.
Where you're playing your transfers together. You're playing your rookies. Ja'Kai Newton can go out and play. And summer league. And so now you're playing Ball State. You're playing Evansville. You're playing Valpo. And you're playing in either, wherever and televise it. You want money?
Make it a moneymaker.
You want money? Open up summer leagues, and make it a radius where you can't travel and it's not coming. Arizona and Gonzaga and everything else, but local summer leagues where you have to play in-state or make a whatever. There's money to be had there, and then we get to see that, and it benefits the programs because they can develop their players.
Yes.
And it's not college players anymore. It's semi-pro or professional players anymore. So this idea that 20 hours a week and all of this stuff, if I'm paying you $1 million to play for Indiana, you're practicing more than 20 hours a week. So the NCAA can just probably go away. It's kind of ridiculous. You got to have credit. They don't even have to go to class anymore. Just go to live in Bloomington, go to the bars, play basketball, and win games, right? I don't like that. But if this is the new way and we're not going to schedule Evansville because we need money, well, make money in the summer and make it a pro league and have summer leagues.
It's coming. That's going to happen, Coach. It makes sense because, again, with the transient rosters, the product of college basketball isn't going to be as good. I think you think back to, even just as recently as the 2013 Big Ten with that great Michigan team and some of those really good Ohio State teams that have been around. What made those Indiana teams under Tom Crean so good? As you sprinkled in a Cody, you had Yogi come, but you had Jordan here and Elston here and Watford here, and those guys had been here, and there was a core, and you had a lot of teams like that who had played together, and you don't have that. If you give teams an opportunity, let one of the assistant coaches be the head coach. That gives them, some great experience. Put it on TV. You see the success of the basketball tournament. It makes tons of sense. By the way, you know who the first person was to propose that idea?
I have no idea.
Calipari. It's one of his best ideas. It's a great idea. I think it's going to happen. I think within 4 or 5 years, because with the money now, you can credibly ask players to do more in the offseason. And especially if they're going to make more money for doing it, as they should. So, and maybe your stars don't play, maybe a Balo or a Renew don't play in the summer league, but you let your younger guys get in there together, but they get some continuity. I mean, I would love it. I think it would be great. I mean, and I have a feeling within a few years it'll happen because it makes too much sense.
Yeah.
Anyway.
That'd be great.
That's it. We're done. No more questions.
I guess he called in from his birthday dinner with his. So I guess that's going to do it for this episode of the Assembly Call. If you want to see us do the show live, join us at assemblycall.com on Thursday nights for the live broadcast of our Assembly Call radio recording. Thanks to Bob Thompson for producing our music, and thanks to John Ringer of rigdesign.com for designing our logos, and thank you for listening. Until then,
take it from me, Yogi Ferrell. Keep your elbows in and your eyes on the rim, and go Hoosiers.
Thank you. Thanks for coming out.
Hey, the show's over. Here I come, Coach Tonsoni.
Thanks, everyone, for being
Good
here.
stuff, Coach. Thanks for hosting.
You're welcome. I got everything going, and then I've had 2 internet outages tonight for the first time in a long time.
Everybody's having internet issues.
Yeah.
I had a bunch of them last week too. I don't know what's going on. It's all falling apart.
Crazy. How's life? How you been? Been good?
I've been good, man. I've been good. I know it's weird not talking to you guys every week.
Oh,
but
no.
So our next show is going to be, we'll do one like the 2nd or 3rd week in September. And then in October, we're going to have, a few more, and then we'll get back into more of a regular rhythm, I think. I'm excited for football, though. I am really excited to see what the first game under Kurt Cignetti looks like. Just how we look.
Yeah.
I have a feeling it's going to look a lot. Love Tom Allen, love a lot of things about Tom Allen.
Good guy.
Never loved the crispness of the football or I have a feeling, it was such a focus under Coach Mallory. And I remember my dad talking about it all the time, the little things, the focus on the little things, and I think that's kind of how Cignetti is. So we may get out talented in some games, but it feels like there'll be less shooting ourselves in the foot, and just removing that from the Indiana football experience will make it more pleasant for everybody, even in losses, So, but I can't wait to see what they look like.
Coaching is difficult too, because sometimes you try to wear too many hats. And I think Tom Allen, a great guy, did a lot of good things for Indiana football, but at times he tried to wear too many hats. And he didn't do any of the hats to the level that he needed to, because he was too spread out, whether it be the promotional stuff, the cheerleading, those kinds of things. And you get caught up in that. That's one of my critiques of mine, was too excited on the sidelines. When I went back and had a time to coach when I was assistant and had to take over a couple games because my head coach had some family issues, I was a lot more calm and reserved. I had learned my lesson. But when you start out as a head coach, sometimes you think you need to be everything. And I think that just got caught up with Tom Allen, and I wish him well, except for when we play Penn State.
In Tom Allen's defense, he was figuring out how to be a head coach on the fly. He'd never done it before, and Galen has made this point a lot on Crimson Cast. The coach at Indiana, Bill Mallory had coached at Colorado, had coached at Northern Illinois, had been successful. He came in here with an established staff. They hit the ground running because they knew what they were doing. And that's what Cignetti is. He's not figuring stuff out. Cignetti knows exactly what he wants, what his role is, what the coach's roles are. And Allen never had that. And even after 7 years, it never felt like he fully got comfortable with it. And so maybe he needs another shot, because he had enough success that you would think someone will give him another shot as a head coach. And so maybe he'll have a better idea for what his program is going to look like. Cignetti is not figuring stuff out. He already did all that, and he knows exactly. He had
that book on that desk day one of how to build a program. That
makes a big difference. I mean, you're already fighting an uphill battle at IU. You can't be also fighting an uphill battle in the building, So a lot of reasons to be optimistic about the football program. And I think to a certain extent, Mike Woodson's been a head coach in the NBA, but there's probably a little bit of that too in college. It's different being a college football
lot,
coach,
I believe.
and you got to figure that out on the fly too. So, it's just, anyway.
You always think you're ready as an assistant. Speaking from, you think you're ready when you're assistant. Then you get thrust into that head coaching job, and you're like, damn, there's a lot more to this.
Because the buck stops
than I thought it as the assistant, right? And you do have to learn on the fly. And the second go-around is usually a lot more smooth for you as you transition if you change jobs.
Yep. All righty.
We'll
be back soon.
The recording.
See you all in the community. All right.
I'll send this off to Ari here.
Actually, I'll probably put this one up. So just put
it'll be in the folder.
Yeah, put it in the folder. I'll get this one up. I'll do it while I'm watching Kamala's speech.
All righty. We talked through it, I think. I just see her waving on the screen right now.
I know, we did talk through it. I'm excited to go back and watch it.
Go play it. All right. We'll see you guys.
Cool, man. See you, Coach.